Hello, welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Panel on Wednesday, the 5th of February 2025. My name is Councillor Chris Moriarty and I will be chairing this meeting. This meeting is being held in person via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees that participation in the meeting indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting it will continue to be available in the public domain. Firstly, it would be useful if all panel members and officers could introduce themselves so that the public are aware of who is in this meeting and the role they are undertaking. So I've already introduced myself as chair. I will hand over to our vice chair to start the introductions.
Yes, I'm vice chair.
Councillor Wisdom Costa, a new member to the panel, and from Windsor, sorry.
Councillor Maureen Hunt, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Julian Sharp, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Julian Teasy, voting member of the panel.
Councillor George Shaw, voting member of the panel.
Hello, good evening. Councillor Gert Singh, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Mark Howard, member of the panel.
Catherine Bogos, service lead for performance policy and delivery.
I'm Sophia Waite-King, Assistant Director of Strategy and Communications.
Mark Bealey, Principal Democratic Services Officer for Overview and Scrutiny.
I'm Kevin McDaniel, Executive Director for Adult Services, Health and Communities.
Ian O'Donnell, I'm the Interim Executive Director of Resources and Section 151 Officer.
I am Lynn Ferguson, Executive Director of Children's Services and Education.
And I'm Nikki Craig, the Assistant Director for HR, Corporate Projects and IT.
Thank you very much. I request that meeting participants do not speak unless I specifically invite you to do so. Once I've invited you to speak, before you do so, please state your name and the capacity in which you are speaking, if appropriate. And I will also ask officers to speak at appropriate times. If any individual attempts to disrupt the meeting, I'm able to use my powers in the Constitution to adjourn the meeting or have the individual removed. I would also like to remind councillors that to improve our time and effectiveness as a panel, I would ask you to please limit the repetition of points and questions or questions which have already been raised by others. Where possible, please put forward all new points or questions which you would like raised during your request to speak. I don't know if that made any sense. Make them nice and succinct, I think is the advice there. We will now start on our agenda items. Do we have any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chair, but just to make the panel and the public aware of a slight change to panel membership from the published agenda front sheet. Councillor Buckley has come off the panel and Councillor Wisdom Da Costa is now a panel member.
Welcome, Councillor Da Costa. Lovely. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Price.
Yes, I'm a member of Maidenhead. Last item on the agenda.
Lovely. Do you want to say that again, just so we've got it on the recording now? It was still a green light when you said it.
You're on now.
You're on now.
I'm a member of Maidenhead Golf Club. It's the last item on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Any other declarations of interest? Councillor Shaw?
I've previously done a contract with Carla Holmes, so it's the last item that's also relevant.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, declarations of interest. So brings us to minutes of the previous meeting. Has anyone got any? I mean, in the previous meeting, it feels like we only just left the room and come straight back in again. It wasn't that long ago. So congratulations to the Democratic Services team for turning around the minutes so quickly. Any points to be raised against the minutes of the previous meeting? No? Lovely stuff. Okay, so that brings us to our first item, substantive item of the evening, which is the quarterly assurance report, which I'll be handing over to Kathleen to take us through. So hand over to you to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is the Q2 assurance report, which presents performance data, risk management data, transformation and audit data as at the end of September and for some monthly measures to October 2024. The purpose of the report is to provide assurance that we are delivering the priorities as they are set up in the council plan. And then the structure of the report, listening to the recommendation of this panel in the past, we provided a summary at the beginning, first paragraphs 4.1 to 419, the key points we highlight in there.
Okay. Yeah, okay, we'll just get a hearing. Yeah, Mark will sort that out for you there. So I'm just going to get a hearing loop out to Councillor Hunt.
On this side. Join us. Join us. Come into the light.
Okay, thank you. So the structure of the report, we listened to the recommendations from this panel in the past, and we highlight the key points in the summary section, paragraphs 4.1 to 419. And with thanks to the recommendation from Councillor Wilson, our portfolio holder for corporate services, we have also evolved the way we present information in this report to make links to from the summary to the other sections of the report, so we make it easier, hopefully, for decision makers and scrutiny members like yourselves to access and to find information that we're referring for. Now, the key points to highlight, the overall position is that the organization continues to struggle with increasing demand as a result of that, with significant financial pressures. You'll discuss more on this in the next item of the agenda. But on this background, the performance for the majority of the measures, 83%, are performance measures, is either on target or just around the target with a small variation. Looking at the big aims of the council plan, I think the ones that we are highlighting in the report as with some areas of red performance relates to children services priority. However, we need to highlight as well that we are working against very tough targets, very stringent targets. And it is good to hear the outcome of the Ofsted inspection that took place in the autumn that validated the fact that the services are good, and for care leavers, they are outstanding. The transformation program updates, again, a key message is that transformation work continues. Only 2 out of the 50 transformation projects are reported as red as at the end of October. And they are delivering savings, achieving savings, transforming ways of working to achieve savings. They are progressing the leisure contract with the aim to engage particular subgroups of residents that otherwise they will not participate in leisure activities. And then we have this digitization with solutions to enable officers to use digital systems to have access to information and to better serve the residents. Another aspect, another key message from the assurance report is that the risk management activity has continued, and we are managing known risks. We don't have new strategic risk emerging during Q3. The financial risk remains the highest, with the highest rating possible, and that's widely reported. And it is due to demand on key services and complexity of key services having that financial impact. And the last element, the highest priority actions identified from audit activity They are reported, monitored, and being progressed. A few of them have reprofiled targets, but they are still being delivered. I will focus briefly on the next level of detail to understand a little bit what are the key challenges and maybe to comment a little bit on key achievements. Again, items that we are highlighting in that summary section of the report. Financial KPIs are not going in the right direction comparing with Q1 reporting and linking with the intelligence that we have about around risk identification. It is clear that the organization is dealing with a number of financial and demand challenges, service demand challenges, and these are being actively managed by the council. You are aware that in autumn we had the publication of the independent review from SIPFA of our financial resilience and the council's response there in detail in the financial improvement and sustainability plan. In terms of actions or area of performance that are challenging, we are reporting that the social worker in permanent position is below the levels that we like. There is some reliance on agency staff and a lot of effort, activity is happening to be competitive, to recruit permanent staff members. But on the other hand, again, listening to messages from residents in our consultations and engagement activities to keep the balance right, to keep the spend under control. Having permanent members of staff is seen as better for the service users and also better financially for the council, and there's work on that. We have challenges in foster placement with, for children. We have a number of foster carers that are retiring, and there is work happening there, joining other 20 local authorities in Southeast to promote recruitment of foster carers, and all of us as corporate parents in our roles, if we can promote the message for families to come forward, to apply to become foster carers, that will be helpful as well. I'll take this opportunity to mention here. Another area of challenge, children subject to repeat child protection plans. We have some family groups that are coming back after having a child protection plan, and the focus to address this is on support after the escalation from child protection plans and preventing cases to come back. Something that is an annual set of measures relates to education attainment, and we are highlighting that for key stage 2, so at the end of the primary stage, there are some challenges in terms of the results for our disadvantaged cohorts, pupils that benefit of pupil premium, and we are ranked 150 out of 153 local authorities. Actions are being taken to improve teaching, in particular, some technical terms there, moderation of results of tests, and then the executive director for children's services will be setting up an education board to work with partners to improve support for this cohort of children. And then the last point that I will highlight in performance, homelessness and temporary accommodation. We highlighted this in previous quarters. It continues to be a challenge here. Why? Because there is significant increase in demand. I think we reach record levels of people requiring temporary accommodation. And we know that we have a shortage of accommodation in the borough. Members, you might be aware that actions are being taken to create capacity locally. But it's a very challenging area. Quickly, in terms of transformation, I mentioned that only 2 of the 50 projects are experiencing some delays, and One is in relation to card payment system, some technical challenges there that officers are working to address with partners. And then another one regarding placement sufficiency around connected care and foster carers due to some financial impact. In terms of risk management, no new strategic risks have been escalated this quarter, but we have some operational risks, new operational risks that are being managed by services, but we report them as part of this assurance report and to governance committee in more detail. And then in terms of movement of risk, one of existing operational risk around temporary accommodation, not a surprise, has been assessed as with an increased rating, and mitigation together with actions to address underperformance is happening. And then I will finish with a few details around achievements or strengths. In terms of assurance, the risk exposure is known. So we know what is happening, we don't have surprises, but we are working hard to mitigate the existing risks that are also reflected in performance. Good progress with delivering the transformation program. We have better contracts, savings realized, particular to mention this quarter, children's services. The savings program is progressing well, and better digital solutions. And in terms of performance, some areas to highlight: timeliness and responsiveness to requests and support needs from our residents. A number of areas performing strongly. We have improved significantly education, health and care plans assessment timeliness, improved initial child protection plan conferences delivered in timescales. There is good response to FOI, freedom of information requests, to planning applications, and then good response from our customer services when customers are contacting us. And all this on the background of increasing demand and increasing complexity in demand for many of these services that I already mentioned. Another area of strong performance around health, public health, drug and alcohol treatment programs completed. More people are engaging with the program, and this stronger partnership working to support residents in this area, and similarly around programs for quitting smoking. We have good rating, hygiene rating, which, as we reported this just before Christmas, I think it was good for local economy and encouraging residents to use the local venues. And then leisure services attendance, again, huge increase comparing with previous years. And importantly, actions to engage people that do not normally engage in leisure activities. I will invite through the chairman members to review and comment on the quarterly assurance report. And if there are any questions, I will aim to answer together with colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Councillor Price, you've got some questions.
Thank you. I want to concentrate on process rather than individual items, because this data, by its nature and collating it all together, is now pretty old and things will have happened since. And also because this was presented at Cabinet last week, where there was the opportunity to listening what Cabinet members said and asking questions. So the last time we looked at this, which I think was about 5 months ago, I specifically referred to items in the council plan that weren't in here, and you explained that those aren't looked at every quarter, but every half year. So I expected them to be in this paper, but I couldn't see them, and it might be that they're in here and I just couldn't see them. So the ones I would just give as examples are 2.3, which is preparing an economic growth plan by October 24, develop and agree a series of memorandum of understanding, you know, how many, with whom, where can the public see this, where can members see it? And then on aim 5, which was to, as an example, establish a community-based equality forum in order to strengthen relationships with diverse groups in our communities. And I'm very hot on equalities. For June 24. Now, I know that hasn't taken place because it came up in the Disability and Inclusion Forum, but I can't see any reference in here to saying it hasn't taken place, we've revised the objectives. So because the plan is the key, the council plan is the key document that we should be doing and following, there may be other things that aren't in here that should be in here, but I haven't got the capacity to go through and check everything. So that's what I wanted to really raise my concern about is this document actually covering everything that should be covered in the plan? And there's a risk, because it is so thorough and you have done such a thorough job, that we can't see the wood for the trees. And I don't want to fall into that trap myself, which is why I'm just going to stay at that level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Indeed, the initial plan was to report a separate section in this report about what we call deliverables against the council plan aims and priorities. We have experienced some delays. We wanted to bring it about this time to report. And the decision was made to link it with the review and refresh of the council plan. So together with the decision that will be made around budget, to be able to come in front of cabinet, council, and this committee to say, this is the progress as at the end of September. These are the new deliverables that we are putting forward for the next financial year. So everyone is clear in terms of the progress that has been made. So yes, we are working on bringing that to this committee, but we have experienced some delays. The officers have reported on the achievements to the end of September. We do have that information. Collectively, we looked at it, but it's a matter of instead of bringing it here with the quarterly assurance report, we're going to bring it with the council plan refresh and review report.
Thank you. I just expressed my slight concern on that is that if when that comes to us, we find some of these things in the council plan haven't been delivered at all, we don't know about that until it's a whole year after that. So there's no catch up. So for me, when this council plan was prepared, it was considered it could be done, but we're not even getting feedback. Look, I'm afraid there's a delay on this. We haven't got the resources, whatever. And we won't know for a year after it is, which is like too late to take any remedial action, really.
For me, thank you. So yes, as I said, the initial plan was to bring everything together in one place. We monitor the delivery of the priorities in the council plan through looking at the deliverables. Have we achieved what we set up to achieve through deliverables? But another set of indicators, the measures that we have, the key performance indicators that we are reporting, and we reported today, we report every quarter, they are also giving us an indication how we are progressing with the council plan. And as I said, the progress update will come to the committee, but we have experienced some delays.
Councillor Howard.
Thank you. I just wanted to focus in on two paragraphs on the report, 4.13 and 6.8, which was about social worker recruitment. Possibly a stream of questions, which may be easier to do one after another rather than in a big lump. But I understood when we first started doing these scrutinies that replacing temporary workers with permanent was a major, major cost saving. And I forget the exact percentage, but I'm sure it was something like double or treble the amount of money for a temporary worker versus a permanent one. And I was a little surprised to see the percentage doesn't move. And I hear the explanation about the idea that there's not enough social workers, basically. But then I start to question that stat. And I'm starting to ask, well, do we have any benchmarking statistics versus the amount of vacancies in other neighbouring boroughs because we're supposedly competing against them for this skilled workforce? How do our pay packages or our packages compare? In other words, if we're still at 46% permanent and we're 18 months after this, that I would say something isn't firing right and we need to go back to the beginning. But that's my opinion. I'm not an expert. So can we find out what, could you answer some of those questions and lead us down the path to where we know a bit more?
Thanks, Joe. I'm happy to say that, Councillor Howard. It's a very good challenge question. I think there's probably a couple of context pieces I'd give first, which are valid for adult care and children's, and Lynn may want to come in on children's, and then there's the specifics locally. So the first thing that's different about social care in Berkshire is that if you are a social worker and you're based somewhere around our borough, you can choose to work for 9 different local authorities and pick and choose 9 different sets of terms and conditions. The vast majority of other councils, apart from ourselves, are in national collective pay bargaining, and pay is of a similar scale across those 9. We are not, and have not been in that situation for over 10 years, and our pay across all roles, not just social workers, is out of step, and we've known that for as a risk, and indeed it's one of the items in our risk register. The other issues relate to non-pay related benefits, predominantly access to local government pension, access to comparable periods of holiday time and those activities, and we are and have been out of step. In adult social care, the decision we made back in 2017 to put all of our adult social care, put our adult social care social workers into the Optilis company. The Optilis company competes in what I'll call the provider market. These are predominantly the companies that provide care at home, residential care. They are competing at the other end of the pay scale. Optilis's terms and conditions are competitive in that market, but they're not competitive in the local authority social care market. So one of the reasons why we embarked on bringing those services back in-house during last year, and from the 1st of August, we've had those roles back in-house. From the 1st of August, we've been able to offer local government pension for the first time. That's particularly important for senior social workers who may have already done 8, 9, 10 years work in the public sector and want to maintain that long-term career benefit. And we know that's one of the significantly sticky factors around pensions in the public sector. What that also told us is that the budget that we bought back from Optilis was based on pay scales that are not competitive in the marketplace. So we've been reviewing our establishment, and with the work of our HR colleagues, with our team, since the services have been back in-house, we've been able to move from a spot salary, a single amount of money we can offer, to a salary range, coupled with a retention bonus that now means we've got something that we can compete on price, quite simply. And we're now actively out with that package. What the social workers have told us since we've done that is the rate at which we were losing them from the organisation has slowed significantly. I wouldn't say it's 0, it never is, but we were losing them wholeheartedly before. So we've managed to put our finger in the hole and stop people leaving. What we're hearing from the marketplace is on the back of our CQC report, which was reviewed in the autumn in the Place Committee. One of the observations from the CQC is that we need, while we've done a good job with our interim leadership, we need permanent leadership to enable us to grow. Because what we know, social workers, alongside some other professional roles, look to their leadership and their management to be sure they're going to be operating in a safe arrangement. So we've also moved from moving from interim management to permanent operational management. So from the 21st of March, we will have a permanent deputy director, which we think ticks the 3 main boxes that staff who were thinking about joining us want to have. They want to have competitive pay, local authority pension scheme, and knowing who's going to be leading them and leading their safety at work. I think we've got in place now the things we need to be able to be successful. That sounds like I'm making a whole load of excuses for the last year. what I think we've done is set the conditions right. What we've absolutely got, and Kathleen talked about it in terms of the refresh of the corporate plan, this measure will be absolutely focused during the next year to show that shift in permanent recruitment on a month-by-month basis. I'd like to think that with these new offer, we'd get 20 social workers on the first month. I wouldn't be able to onboard 20 social workers on the first month, but I'd love to have that as a problem. So if any social worker is listening to this and wants to come and work for RBWM, I would love to talk to them. And I hope that gives you a sense of what the issues are and how we've gone about trying to fix them in the context the council's in.
So you're reasonably positive that that number of the mid-40s will start to creep up, the savings will start to come in, savings which will obviously go into the bigger bucket of money, but at the same time, it will possibly allow us to use that money to recruit even more social workers with a better package to keep them and retain them.
I hope so. What we've had to do in order to make the pay scales I talk about, we've had to recognise some posts that we've never had filled. We've taken off the establishment and we're reusing that money because we haven't been able to write any new money for this. But you're right, we need to make the savings so we're not spending the overhead on the agency staff. If I may just make the point that one of the other things that we've seen this year is because of the system changes we put in place in our practice, we've seen a reduction in the turnover of agency staff as well. So we've seen some evidence that our approach is being valued by staff. So we've had less recruitment costs this year, but we're still paying a lot of money for agency staff.
And where does the, shall we say, the other 8 boroughs around us, where does their sort of balance between permanent and contract staff sort of balance out?
I can't speak exactly for them. It certainly would be much less. But then we know we're competing in a marketplace where they're spending different amounts of money on there. I can't really talk for them, but I know that it's flat been identified as an issue for us, and I agree that we've got to reduce the number.
It might be something that, I mean, obviously in our reports, we've got a percentage out there, and it might be a thing which would be useful in the HR process to know what these other guys are getting as a percentage of balance between temporary versus permanent. Because at that point, we know that we're either doing well or we're doing badly. And at the moment, I have nothing to judge either way. I obviously trust your opinion, but I would also like to know where we stand amongst others.
I think I may just come back. Obviously, we're in a public forum here. We do talk to our peers. We have a sense, which is why I'm comfortable telling you, Councillor Howard, that we are in a position where we need to improve. And I know that's a fact. Forgive me, I'm not going to share the information I have confidentially from other colleagues, which help me understand how exactly the question you want to ask, I'm not able to answer in this public forum, but I'm confident that we're on the right track.
Paul, Councillor Howard, just to say a little bit about children's. We've had these conversations before, and I won't repeat a lot of what Kevin has said because what applies to social work and adults is very, very similar to the challenges in children. But what I would say is that our social work, we've had a recruitment and retention action plan in place for about 18 months now. And our social work turnover has reduced from 29% 18 months ago to just under 12%. So we are seeing progress. That's still high. We would, higher than we'd like, but it is better than it was. And we are currently employing less agency social workers than we were. And in that action plan, we've been working on a range of things. We are growing our own social workers. So that means bringing in social workers who are going through, are students, so their first year in social work with a view to retaining them in the borough. We've got a recruitment champion. We share across Achieving for Children who help us with that recruitment and onboarding, which is really important. We've got stability bonuses in place for our social workers. At the end of last year, we reviewed base salaries and we put those base salaries up in the areas where that was needed. So we'd be more competitive in the market with our colleagues. And we have had conversion conversations with agency staff, trying to get them to convert to be permanent. So, you know, I think we've got a range of things in place. We are seeing progress. When Ofsted inspected us in October, they could see we've made progress, but they could also see, and we would agree, that we've still got work to do. And it is tricky out there. And, you know, this is an issue that most of our other councils are facing, some more so than others. And it's difficult because what you will see happen in regions is you almost get into this sort of price war, you know, so one council will put salaries up or offer a really good market supplement, and then another authority will follow suit, and you know, you get into that sort of issue. But you know, what I would say is that we are now very competitive from a children's services perspective in the market, and our staff say that when they come here, they enjoy working for children's services, they enjoy working for this council. And like Kevin has said, if there's anyone out there who would like to come and talk to us about becoming a social worker, both myself and Kevin would be very interested to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I should imagine our recruitment costs will continue to drop if we keep making adverts in the meeting. So that's a cost saving right there, isn't it? Councillor Da Costa. Oh, sorry, did you want to just come back on that?
Just very briefly, just doing a quick Google search. Bracknell, for instance, was spending £2.5 million on temporary agency staff a year or so ago. And there are the stats in there to be able to go and find out. The fear I have is that exactly you're doing the same thing as you were saying, is that somebody, you know, you've got 9 variables. If one puts the price up, then the other 8 have to follow. And so consequently making sure that you're not doing too much, but also not doing too little is a very, very difficult balancing act to do. And I think is being able to go and have a look at some of the reports which are from other councils, which are freely available on, you know, on the internet, would be probably useful. Also, they've got all their salary ranges on it as well.
Yeah, and we've done that comparative work because I think that's really important. But I think one of the other areas is that regional collaboration, and I think that's where we need to get to. We need to be able to collaborate a bit more. I'm, you know, not sure what that would look like. We'd need to have those conversations, but I think that's because we're all struggling with a very similar issue. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Da Costa, sorry, I tried to keep us on the same topic there. Did you want to speak? Is that?
Yes, please. Yeah, so I just want to say, listen, well done for the super adverts for foster caring and for social workers and other staff. It's great to see that. I appreciate the work you're doing. We have this sort of perfect or super cell of perfect storms that we're suffering, and there's great concerns to residents, puts in you guys as officers under huge pressure. So thank you for the progress you're making. Now, I want to just pick up a point from Councillor Price. I thought what you said was very useful, that there are some items which are in the corporate plan, perhaps not reported yet in the assurance. So is it possible to get a specific date at a future meeting on the work programme so that you can report back on that? So that's just a request, okay, so please put that in, because obviously we're very interested in that. And I know that Councillor Price is very keen on understands EQIAs and equalities very, very well. So I have a few questions. I hope if I can just ask for forgiveness of the questions, especially as a newbie on the panel. So how should I do this? Put them all at once, or? Yeah. Okay. So the first question is really to do with the assurance report. I mean, it's a huge span covering the whole range of issues and all the services that RBWM provide. So the question is really to do with the production of the plan and understanding, well, what are the data sources? Are they underlying systems within each operating department? Is there any manual rekeying here, or are there any sort of manual processes? That's the first question. Second question is, when we look at the plan, clearly some of the targets are very, very important. They are what you're measuring by, and your indicators are based on those targets and our ability to, or where we match with those targets. So how often are those targets reviewed, and how often does that come to corporate scrutiny to review those targets, perhaps as an in-depth session? Because obviously it's the whole range of services, and we provide thousands of services, each of which are quite unique in themselves. The next question is, I love the figures 4 and 5. They're fantastic in the way in which you're actually mapping risks in a very easy to understand manner, both the corporate risk and the operational risks. So the question really is, in terms of the strategic risks, how are those used by management? And that's the question. So how is that reviewed, and how is that utilised? How does that inform their daily activities, or how much they plan their actions and how they move forward? And then a specific question on figure 5. I can see you've got pensions up there, high on impact and effect. So the question really is just simply, having spent some time as a trustee and also on the Berkshire Pension Fund, what aspect of pensions is that's causing a risk there, or causing a concern there, should I say? Is it? So I'll leave that open as an open question. The last question is to do with, sorry, 2 questions more. Sorry about this. Internal audit. Clearly, we're coming from industry. Internal audit is a key function, absolutely vital function in terms of helping to ensure that policies, processes, risks, and even errors and fraud are identified. So the question is to how are we using internal audit? How many people have we got there? Has that increased or decreased in number? And then the final question, that's probably more for Ian as much as anyone else, Mr. Coleman, sorry, sir, is to do with forecasting. We've traditionally had problems with forecasting, to put it politely. Even this year, we're 18%, or £80 million overspent. So forecasting is an issue, but it's only reflected as a specific line in adults. So clearly adults are perhaps looking to improve the financial acumen of operational staff to understand what the issues are and how to valuably quantify costs and risks. Is that not being also delivered, that sort of improvement in financial acumen across other operational areas? Because the budget, the forecast, the outturn shows 3 areas where we've got key overspend lines. So the question is, how are we looking at forecasting and improving the financial acumen of all of our staff rather than perhaps just adults? Maybe I've misread that. Maybe it's been presented incorrectly or not incorrectly, but in a way I didn't understand in the report. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, I think with that last question, it might be sort of blending into the next agenda item as well with the budget monitoring. So we'll sort of navigate that as we go. I've got Stephen online who's popped his hand up. So we'll hand over to Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Councillor Da Costa. A really important set of questions. I wonder if I could just maybe give an overview and then maybe hand over to Catalan and others to fill in some of the details. So I think the kind of premise of your questions are about how are we using the information in the report to, I guess, assure ourselves about the performance of the council. So how we're doing that at officer level. I guess in a few ways. One is that we come together every quarter as ELT assurance group. So that is to go through the performance report in detail before it goes to cabinet and before it comes to committee. Other colleagues that are invited to that meeting include the head of internal audit, which is through a contract. So we're also looking at the recommendations from the internal audit programme, and we are looking at how we're responding to those recommendations. So we scrutinise it in detail through assurance and ELT. We look at the risk register, and the risk register is very much a live document. So what you'll see over the course of a year is some risks coming on and off of that risk register, depending on the events of that year. So you'll see, obviously, last year we had a general election. That was very much on the risk register in the run-up to the general election, because that is a key corporate deliverable for the organisation. Once that's delivered, that comes off of the strategic risk register. So we come together as ELT to scrutinise it in detail, but beneath that, directors and their teams also scrutinise this performance data and all the information in there through their directorate management teams on a more regular basis. So we're looking at a directorate level and a corporate wide level. The other piece of governance we've got in place is what's called a performance and resources board, which brings together the wider senior leadership team. So the assistant directors coming together to look at all of the performance data, and that meets before ELT, and they go into detail as well, and they raise issues that they want to raise with ELT. So it's that's the overall kind of framework that we're working to as a kind of senior leadership team, and maybe Catalan and others can pick up some of your other detail points.
Thanks, Stephen. I mean, listening to that, it kind of feels like your third question and your fifth question have been touched on there, which was how risk is used and how it's reviewed, and the internal, looking at the internal audit part of it. I mean, I wonder, Catalan, whether you could focus in a little bit on things like the process leading up to the report and the systems, and also that kind of if targets adjust and change, how that process looks, and the role of overview and scrutiny in those sort of target reviews as well.
Thank you. So in terms of the production of the report, we have a variety of services. Some of them have some activity recording systems, and we know from this report and previous reports that transformation work is happening to improve the tools, the systems that we are using to give decision makers, middle managers, top managers, frontline managers, the information they need on a weekly, ongoing basis to be able to make decisions. This report here is the assurance report to give cabinet and to give this panel the assurance that progress is being made to deliver the council plan priorities and aims, and bringing the information together from a number of systems. For performance, there is an element of extracting data from numerous systems. Adult social services, they have their own system, children's services, another one, highways, another one, revenues and benefits, another one. And there is a process of collating that information into one place. We do have a tool, a digital tool, performance measurement system. We put the information in there so everyone can access it from the system. It takes a little bit of time to allow for the end of the reporting period for social workers to come back from their visits, to record their visits and so on. So the percentages, the numbers can be calculated. Sometimes there are delays on this, and we need to allow a little bit of time for quality assurance of data. So there is a run of information and then it's being checked and say, that cannot be possible, let's check the recording. So that process to bring as accurate a reflection of the reality as possible for the decision makers. So it is a process that takes time, involves quality assurance, because we want to bring that intelligence to decision makers on a quarterly basis. But importantly, the difference between this assurance report and the management information that managers get on a much faster and regular basis, I think I highlighted. In terms of target settings, the target setting normally is an annual exercise. We are looking at setting targets. I mentioned that deliverables and targets for the KPIs for next year will come to Cabinet Council and will be on the forward plan for scrutiny panel as well, to decide on the targets for the next year. However, because the reality changes in 12 months and there is no point to wait for the end of the year to change some targets, you have even in this report the target around placement in foster carer. I think it's a suggestion that starting Q3 to increase that because of the impact on finances of the council and the teams having to focus more on increasing that element.
Thank you very much. Is it another point moving on? Or is it about? Yeah, cool. We'll come to you in a moment then, Councillor Shaw. Then from your list of questions, Councillor Da Costa, the only one I think it was about pension risk. There we go. I'll hand over to Ian on that one.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I had a few comments on a number of the answers. The first one I'll comment on is the question about risk and how this is used by management. So the fact that we've got a risk management system and process within the council means that when we've identified risks, we set about mitigating them. And our risk management process allows us to look at the mitigating actions that have been identified and monitor whether they are being successful and whether they're being implemented properly. In addition to that, risk feeds into our internal audit program. So, we seek assurance about those areas where there is significant risk. And it feeds into the calculation that the finance team makes about the level of reserves that we need as an organisation in order to be able to manage those risks and survive the shocks that can happen to the budget during the course of a year. In relation to pensions, I think the question was, what is it that's causing concern? Well, the risk that has been identified is the question of whether we will be able to hit our target of bringing the pension fund to a fully funded position by the agreed date, which is the 31st of March 2040. So the reason why this is a risk for the council is because the council has to contribute towards the cost of closing that deficit through employers' contributions into the pension fund. At the moment, that is a 16.6% amount on salaries. So it's quite a significant amount of money. It actually amounts to around 3.8 million a year cost to our revenue budget. So the action that we take to mitigate that risk is obviously very important to the council's budget. And finally, you asked about forecasting the budget position. Chair, do we want to take that question now or when we come on to the budget monitor?
Should we do it as part of the next item? Yeah, let's do it as part of the next item then. Thank you. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Very much for that. So can I just saying that you're separating the risk? We help manage the pension fund. Great. There are the committee, there are officers there, and so the officers are under the supervision of RBWM staff. What you're specifically referring to isn't the management of the fund, but rather the underfunding of the fund for RBWM section of that. Great, thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Chair, I'll just coming on to this, continuing on to this this conversation. Yeah, I like the traffic light system that we're using there, and I'm confident that obviously there is controls in place there, which is good. Just a question, actually, really. I know Stephen's mentioned about the ELT assurance meetings that happen. Are they every week, aren't they, Stephen? Or are they every month?
Well, it's ELT meets every week, but every quarter we discuss this report before it comes to councillors.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, so that's really useful. Obviously, you've got a grip on that and with the senior leadership team. Normally, in this sort of setup and scenario, obviously, when you've got the amber light and the red light on, you'd expect a more sort of intensive scrutiny and you just sort of dive into that and have a look if you can change that back into green. I think what would be useful is, because these reports are quarterly and they're quite dated once we receive them. I know you said it is a live system. I'm just wondering whether just to increase the oversight of this process, would you be able to share this maybe perhaps on a monthly basis with the chair, just so the committee is cited on the progress being made, whether we've got any concerns or we're happy with it, just so we can see what's going on. But if the report's been created anyway.
For us to share on a monthly instead of quarterly will triple the workload of the resource that we have. So that will be extremely challenging to to do that from the resource point of view. And it's not only the people that are compiling the report, it's everyone, all the services that report the data, bring it together, so on. There is assurance because when these like dashboard lights of a car, they turn amber or red, then the services are prompted even more as in addition to what they do on a daily basis to supervise each individual case being progressed and so on. There is that requirement for them to look at what is happening, to be crystal clear about why that happens, and then to come forward. And you have in this report a summary of the actions that are being put in place to respond to the red or amber signal. They are, of course, much faster in the organization as opposed to when we reach the stage to put it in the public domain and in this committee on the cabinet. So that the assurance is happening, or the management is happening in that way, and the assurance is happening in this public meeting.
Okay, yeah. So what I'm saying, I'm not asking for obviously a full detailed report every month. I'm just saying because it was mentioned that this is a live document. Is there any way a senior officer in the borough can, on a day-to-day basis, have sight of that dashboard or know what the position is, or a weekly basis, or where, for example, when you have the ELT meeting?
So we have some KPIs that are monitored on a monthly basis, and we have some that are monitored on a quarterly basis. The managers, they have access to what I will call management information from their own service-specific systems. Adult social care, they have from their adult social care system dashboards. We have a new system that we report here. Dashboards are being developed and made available on a live, on the system basis to be able, as I said, to managers, frontline managers, the people that are managing our social workers and our workers that are going out to provide services, to have that information for the areas that they manage. So I think that's good. There are tools to manage and there are tools to provide assurance.
Thank you. We've got Lynn and Kevin want to contribute to that, so let's go with Lynn first.
Thought it might be helpful, Councillor Singh, just to give you a bit of a sense of what happens in children's services. So the data informs our work on a daily basis. So we get data, some data every day, some data weekly, some data monthly, some data quarterly, and we obviously report up quarterly. I think it is really, really important that the directorates, the separate directorates, are responsible for the operational detail from day to day, week to week, because we're the subject experts and we are able to delve underneath the data to try and understand why the data has increased or reduced or whatever that might be. So in children's services, we do that on a monthly basis. So that is where I see the operational responsibility. What we're doing when we then report to the council as directorates is to provide the council with reassurance on trends. So we're not sort of saying to the council, we want you to delve into and deal with the operational detail. We want to assure you, we want you to ask questions and to challenge us on that data. And so from my perspective, I feel that quarterly is appropriate to that task. But I think it's important to say there's a lot of other work that goes on in the directorates, analysing and scrutinising that data on a much more regular basis, if that makes sense, if that helps.
Thank you, Jan. I'm really conscious of your words at the start about not duplicating. So Lynn said just about everything I was going to say. And I think what I would say for adult social care, our operational management team meets weekly. We start to feel and see something's going on. It takes 3 or 4 weeks to understand whether it's a trend. If it's a trend, can we do something about it operationally? So the periodic nature about quarterly saying this is real and it's moved on our risk register feels about right to me in the nature of many of our services. But please be reassured that in addition to the ELT system that Stephen set out, operationally in directorates, weekly and fortnightly, we're looking at those things and trying to work out what's real and what's just a feature of natural variation. So I'd support Lynn's view that quarterly works well.
I'm conscious of time because we've still got some fairly significant. Oh, Stephen, do you want to just say something quick and then?
Yeah, maybe just to complete the set. I mean, I said earlier we kind of talk about this report on a quarterly basis, but you know, I myself and the directors talk every day, and we meet as ELT every week, and we pretty much every week are talking about risk, talking about performance issues. So, you know, I outlined earlier in response to Councillor Da Costa the kind of the overall framework, but I don't want to give you the impression that as a collective leadership team, we're only talking about it on a quarterly basis. We are talking about it constantly.
Thanks. I guess the point I was going to make, and just looking at the queue of speakers that we've got, is that I always feel with the QAR, when it comes to this committee, we end up talking more about the process of the QAR than we do about the content of the QAR. And I'm not sure that's an amazing use of our time as councillors now. I mean, I was a little bit kind of taken aback when I opened a document with 77 pages in it and thinking, you know, the volume of detail in there, how useful is it for us to provide our role? I suppose coming at this from looking at it from what is our role on it? You know, we report recommendations and feelings and views to Cabinet. That's what our job is. And to do that, we need to understand the direction. Now, people know I like a metaphor. There's one that's always stuck with me in a book called Turn the Ship Around, where they talk about being able to adjust course, and they talk about a little bit of rudder. And the idea being that if you can start to see yourself coming off track, it's much better to catch that early so you can make small adjustments than waiting until the very last minute and realising it's going to take an about turn. So I think for me, I'm saying this because if there's any more people that want to talk about process, then maybe we can sort of move it out of the meeting, is that I would be more than happy to spend some time, and perhaps Councillor Price can join me on this as well as Vice Chair, with the team to sort of maybe try and match up some of the things that we're looking for from a overview and scrutiny point of view in a way that's mindful of resources, because we have to be, you know, I think Paul Pullman at Unilever stopped quarterly reports because he found it was just reporting all the time and not doing, so that we've got to balance that out. But I think it's a fair critique that we're looking at data from September and in some cases in that report from March last year. And you kind of wonder what value we can bring to that if we're looking at old data. You know, what is it that we can say about it? Because a lot might have changed in the meantime. So if it's all right with panel members, I'm happy personally, and I didn't mean to give you a job, Helen, but you know, I'm sure we can contribute a little bit to kind of come up with an agreed way forward and capture some views from panel members about what can be improved.
Thank you. Very quickly to add, we are organizing with the Democratic Services colleagues an item on the members' development program to have the training sessions and the conversations so we can understand in detail how things work, why do they work, that what is the role of this report, what is the role of the management information report, and combined with what you just suggested as well, I think it will provide that understanding and together to improve the processes.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that in mind then, I've still got a few people, and like I said, we're an hour in and we've got some fairly chunky agenda items still to go. So I'll hand over to Councillor Shaw.
You'll be happy to hear mine is content related. So my questions regarding, I think I've raised with you recently, Lynn, there was something highlighted in this report, and I'm happy that it was highlighted, especially more clearly since last quarterly report, in the percentage of disadvantaged pupils meeting the expected standard in reading, writing and math has dropped since the previous. And I'd like to also praise the of honesty and the contextualization of that it's clearly that we ranked 4th worst in the country. So my questions regarding this are, could we update what's being done to mediate this? I've noted that there's been research done in this area and there's a variety of councils identified near us, such as Wokingham and Slough, which don't have as big a gap between the attainment of their disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged students, and whether that's something that we know about, whether it's a strategy, something, whether we're looking in and haven't discussed it with them. And from a step back, this is, I think this was it Key Stage 2? Is this seen across all key stages, or is this like, so have we been highlighted the worst case, or is it something that we're seeing as a trend across all?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Shaw. It is particularly an issue at Key Stage 2, so you're absolutely right. If you look at Key Stage 4, that gap reduces. So it's one of those wicked issues in the borough. So I've not been around here forever, but Kevin, as you know, was the DCS prior to me, and the issue of this attainment gap has been an issue in the borough for many years. What I can say in terms of what we're doing about it is quite a bit. So we started a training programme about 12 months ago in the borough. It is a Tom Sheridan programme. It's called Walk Through, and that is about, it's a programme of quality first teacher training. So that is taking place at the moment. It's a 2-year programme. So we're not necessarily going to see the benefits of that programme until at least next year. So that we're really pleased that we've managed to get that into the borough. So that's the one thing. I think the other thing, and it's a really good question because it has raised, we're concerned about this. And we had a meeting, a scoping meeting about it with a number of head teachers last week. And what we were saying was, we can't, we've got to do something about it. Just because it's been like that for a long time doesn't mean to say we got to accept it. We need to understand what is happening. We need to understand what is happening, particularly at Key Stage 2. So we are, alongside the training programme I've talked about, we're setting up something that may not be called an education board, but it's going to be a board, a strategic board, where we're coming together with head teachers and educationalists in the area, as well as social care and other colleagues, to look at some of those wicked issues and to try and get under the skin of them and really understand what we believe is happening in the borough, and more importantly, what we're going to do about it. So, we have recognised it's a significant issue, and we want it to improve, basically.
Just to follow up, so, but has any work been done with, say, Wokingham or Slough, or I think a few London boroughs have also been identified that don't have this big clan?
Learning from other areas. It has been done, and we are currently doing that at the moment. And we haven't yet reached out to Slough and to some of our Berkshire colleagues. We may well do that, but we're currently in having conversations with a couple of London boroughs at the moment, where they have managed to turn that tanker. Obviously our demographics are very different. We need to bear that in mind. But, I think there's some really good learning that we can get from the two authorities we're talking to in London.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Teasey.
Thank you, Chair. I have one question, fewer than I did. Thank you, Councillor Shaw. That was one of the things I was going to ask about, but I won't. I have one small point of process, sorry, Chair, which is just notwithstanding just talking about the QAR. Can I just say I really love it. I love the format. I think that it seems to be getting better every quarter. I think it's clear. It's about the right length. It's easy to read. And just for information, please don't go to any more than quarterly, because I think that this clearly it takes a lot of work, and I'd rather we do it right every quarter than try and rush it. And I'm aware there are other things that we do have, like MI Sorry, so that's my first point there. My the others, everything else is to do with content. So can I start first of all with, I just want to check that I've understood something correctly. So 6.8, we talk about it's already been mentioned before, the permanently recruited social workers, and there's been a TUPE transfer of 100 colleagues to the council, it says, in August. And then I can see it then says that data prior is deemed unreliable and is no longer reported. Now, can I just check something? Because there's a table, which I thought was really, really good, of headcount, which I've lost the page. It's on, I'm really sorry. It's further down. It's somewhere in the middle. It's on page, it's sort of right in the middle of the report. I've got page 33 of 77. Now, the overall, it shows the overall headcount for RBWM being at 675, which is about almost exactly 100 up from previously. And if you look at where that is, everything's moved barely anything, but in adults, it's 100 up. It's literally exactly that. And it just seems, I'm guessing that that's not a coincidence. I'm guessing that that is the reason. Can I just please clarify that? Because obviously there's been a lot of talk about, you know, the number of headcount, but I just want to check it might be just that. Before asking any questions, let's just ask.
If I may, Councillor Tissy, Nicky will correct me if I've got this wrong. The table you're looking at in the middle is the information from RBWM's HR system, and that's been consistent throughout the period. When we transferred the colleagues from Optalis into the council, we moved them into this system, and that's why you can see 100 increase in the table. The section you referenced in numbers was specifically relating to the percentage of permanent social workers. Optalis were using a different number of, when they were doing a percentage, they had a different number of posts than one we've actually found when we've cleaned the data up and we brought it over. So that comment was related to that very specific performance indicator, not the overall headcount data.
Can I just check on that point then? So, the overall headcount table shows essentially what 97 people, sort of, you know, 10 commissioning, 85 adult social care, 2 performance, previously zero in that area.
Yes.
Are they related to that 2P?
Yes, they were the posts that came.
Okay, fine.
They were the posts that came across. Yes.
Okay. That's just because obviously that's the big number that's changed. So we're not sort of comparing like with like, as it were. Excellent. Okay. Just for the record then. Okay. So having cleared that up, so my next question was about audit actions. Now I know that we have an audit governance committee coming up, but can I just on 4.4. Going back up there, sorry, 4.4. Sorry, just let me scroll. Oh, yes, so it's appendix, if we go to appendix C, that's got the details of it. So in appendix C, we have most of the items being self-assessed as complete, except for a few on contract management. Now, I know that contract management is one of those things that it's a key strategic risk, and it's been pushed back a couple of months. Can I just get a sort of, leave it as wide as I can I just get a sense of what we're doing about that? I know that we've sort of given ourselves a few more months. We said it's been moved to procurement, and there's the new Procurement Act in terms of training. There's in terms of the framework, it's now in the council plan. It'll be completed after the implementation of the Procurement Act. Can I just get some sort of an overview of what's happening there, please?
Are you able to talk to that? Great, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the impact of the Procurement Act has been to cause a delay in the action that we're taking in relation to procurement, because there's a a priority action, which is to incorporate the requirements of the new Procurement Act into our procurement activity. So that has had to be integrated into the work that we are doing. So that's caused the dates to go back. The essential requirement around our procurement is not only to get the procurement process right and to make sure that we go out to the market at the right time, which is all about getting the pipeline right with procurement, understanding our contracts, how long it's going to take us to let them and so on. But there's also quite a large chunk of this which is about contract management. And there's a requirement which has been identified to develop some training for contract managers across the council. It's not currently a standard piece of training that people receive when they become a contract manager. So they're rather thrown into the deep end of having to manage a contract. We want to change that and be in a position where all of our contract managers are properly equipped. So developing all of that as a program is taking us time. It's been put back a little bit, but the revised dates are in the report.
Thank you. I mean, so it sounds like because we've had this extra act, because we have these extra requirements, it's delaying it, but it's still very much looking to do this half, hopefully. Okay, so my final point is actually completely different. It's 4.14, so 4.14, and also 7.16. So this is about child protection plans. So I noticed that the number of children who are being subject to a CPP within 2 years has significantly increased, almost doubled. It recognises that it's a small number of children, so possibly that it's, in terms of percentage, might skew the data. But it is a worry, obviously, because we want to try and get it right first time. We want, but it's and obviously these will be very, very difficult for everyone involved. But I just wonder, in terms of, is there anything that we're doing to, in terms of actually trying to sort of reduce that number, trying to get these, so that we're not keeping to come back to we do get it right first time, as it were.
And obviously what we want to do is to get it right first time for our families and children and young people. Yet you have highlighted that we had 1 quarter where children subject to repeat child protection plans within 2 years almost doubled to just over 35%. This is a measure that isn't static and fluctuates and can fluctuate largely from month to month. And, as it says, we're talking about very small numbers. And when we have very small numbers, as we do in this borough, it can skewer the data. Now, in this particular quarter, I know that we had a number of large sibling groups. And so when you get that situation with large sibling groups, you will see that fluctuation. But what I can reassure panel is that that percentage has since reduced, and I'm confident when we come and talk about this in the next quarter, I will be reporting on a different figure. But I think it's a really important one, and one that we look at very closely in our monthly performance board, because this is about getting it right for children and families first time around. So good question. Thank you.
Councillor Howard.
Mr. O'Donnell, you answered to Julian's question about contract management source. And it did bring me back to something we were talking about in the last meeting like this, scrutiny meeting, and about the commercial ability. Contract management is obviously about cost management. I'm just wondering whether or not we have the right skills in place for commercial management to obtain revenue, because I'm to be convinced on that.
So the council has a number of opportunities to obtain revenue from commercial activity. And that doesn't include things like collecting taxes, but it does include things like undertaking services or providing goods to the public. And sometimes it is in competition with others in the market in order to provide those services. So the rules that govern the council's ability to trade generally restrict the council to a position where it's not allowed to make profit out of its trading activity. There are some exceptions to this. So, for example, specific legislation permits a council which is running a crematorium to make a profit on any items that it might sell at the crematorium. But unless there is some specific legislation that underpins a charging policy like that, the council's position is that it can't make a profit. So that does mean that in most cases, the attractiveness of entering into any kind of commercial arrangement which involves that kind of trading is quite low. We end up making a contribution to overheads, which is obviously valuable, but we can't make a profit from it. Now, I suppose it's worth mentioning that it's never really been the council's core business to be a commercial entity. We are about providing services to residents. And so it's always been the case that the focus has been on service delivery, getting that right, meeting the performance targets that we set around that. And so it's tended to be a secondary skill for councils to have that kind of commercial ability. And actually, councils are not designed to reward people who, would normally be rewarded for that kind of commercial acumen with a high salary. Councils aren't structured in a way that makes that possible. So I think all of those things make it quite difficult for councils to be successful at commercial activity. Having said that, what I would expect to see in place in any council that's undertaking that kind of activity is a proper understanding of the reasons why they're entering into that market in the first place. So there would be some kind of policy sitting behind it, a policy which also looks at the extent to which the council is looking to intervene in that market. So it might wish to subsidise the provision of a service. An example of that is pest control, where some councils offer free pest control when there's a pest problem in a particular area. So all of those considerations need to be properly thought through, and you also need a proper system for charging and for collecting the money, and a correct policy around that. And ideally, you want to avoid any costs that are associated with giving people credit. You want them to pay at point of sale, if at all possible. So, I know that was a bit of a long-winded reply, and I'm sorry, but what I'm trying to get to is that I agree that I think it's a difficult area for councils, and I think that our risk appetite is less than it used to be because of our financial position.
Councillor Howard, I'm just conscious of time as well.
Particular one, you were looking at quite precisely at things which, yeah, you're right. I was thinking about utilising our assets. We were having a discussion last time regarding the efficient running of car parks, whether or not we're getting the right revenue, are we making sure that people are effectively paying for what they're using, and whether or not we might be better off partnering with more commercial companies to deliver increased revenue in that sort of asset-focused business model, which we could then domino into other things where I've heard discussions about renting of rooms and various other, shall we say, difficult to do things. And I appreciate what you're saying is difficult, but I also sometimes think we need to just say it is difficult. Let's give it to somebody else to do and look at a way of skimming something off the top of something which we're not getting paid for today.
Thank you. Cheers. Did you want, I mean, don't feel like you need to, but.
Just very briefly, in response to that, yes, I mean, if we can pass the risk on to an entity that's better placed to manage the commercial risk, then that's an attractive option.
Okay, Councillor Shah, thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Chair. I've never really been a fan of these sort of things because I think that it's largely too confusing and you can't compare them over time because the measures that you take for the different areas change. So it's quite difficult to compare them. And ultimately, I think all we need to understand is whether we are doing a better job for our residents or not on a quarterly basis. So, for example, if we look at the figures from a quarter ago, and I've tried to look through this report and do some comparisons, and then look at this quarter's report, to me, it looks like the results are that the services and the measures are decreasing rather than increasing, and we're delivering less well to our residents this quarter than the previous quarter. Would that be about right?
Okay, so I think we are summarizing in the report, and there are the, I think, figures 1 and 2. They are showing the overall picture about how we are progressing towards delivering what we promised that we're going to deliver to residents in the council plan and priorities. We are reporting that a slightly higher number of measures have missed the target this quarter, but when we're talking about slightly higher, I think it's in paragraph.
To me, if I can just cut in there, sorry to cut you short, but to me it looks like there are more amber and red measures than there are green measures. And where there's a comparison with last quarter, the figures are down. In other words, we've got reduced service and reduced quality of service compared to a quarter ago. And I wondered whether there was a way, like in the same way that schools go through Ofsted reports and we go through similar sort of things as a council, but whether there was a way of putting a red, amber or green flag against the report overall, so we could see whether quarter by quarter we were moving in the right direction or not. Because when you read there's an enormous amount of detail here, and it's all really useful and interesting when you dig into it. But at top level, it's really useful just to be able to understand, is the council improving in the way it's delivering services, or is it not? And in that case, what are the measures that we're taking to ensure that we will deliver better to our residents in the future? Because that's really what we're here for. We're not here to do anything else except deliver successful services to our residents. And if we're failing in that in some way, and the measures are showing that we're deteriorating, then we're not really doing our job. And looking through the report here, it looks like that's the situation we're in at the moment. We've got a declining service level with the measures overall.
So we've got Stephen online, and then I'll come to you, Lynn, after Steve.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's a fair line of questioning from Councillor Sharp. I think I would say a number of things. First of all, there are a number of indicators and there are a number of different sets of data in this report, and those indicators and that data will ebb and flow over the course of a number of months. So I do think there's a point about if we're going to make an assessment about making it over a realistic time scale. And what we might want to do, because I think it's too simplistic to sort of say, because our performance, we're showing slightly less green and slightly more amber than a quarter ago, that automatically means that our service quality and our service to our residents has decreased. I'm not sure that's a safe assumption to make. But I think what we could do is, when we do effectively our annual review of our performance reporting, we could attempt to summarise across that year how we think performance has gone. So I think it's a fair line of questioning, but I want to make sure we're doing it in a representative way, if that makes sense.
Doing some sort of, I sat through many meetings like this, looking at data of this type that the council has produced over many years now. And it would be really useful if there was some sort of comparison between councils, so that we knew that, I don't know, say Bracknell or Wokingham or Slough or whoever it was, Reading, any of our nearby councils were doing it better or worse than us in terms of the quality of services that they're delivering to their residents, because that gives us a view, a vision of what we might need to do to improve. And if you haven't got those measures, what you're doing is living in a little bubble to say, oh, we think we're doing okay, and look, we've got some greens and some ambers, and that's all right, and we've got a few reds as well. But really what we want to be seeing is the reds disappearing and turning amber, and the ambers turning green. And if we can have some comparison between councils to see how they're doing on the same sort of measures, that's going to help to put that sort of discipline in place.
I'm going to try, if it's all right, I'm going to try and wrap this up, because we're sort of diving back into the kind of process bit, and I appreciate your comments, Councillor. I think the key here in looking at the summary is paragraph 4.1. In effect, I think that's the summary you're looking for in terms of quarterly progress. I take Stephen's point there that, whether or not we're performing well against services are degrading, well, that depends on the target. The target might be a vast improvement on services that we're not quite meeting, but it might be an improvement year on year. So I think that's always the danger when you're looking at headline numbers, is that there's a lot of stories behind it. I've worked in benchmarking companies for the best part of a decade, so I think benchmarks against other organisations generally is a bit of a risk, because you don't understand their context and what they're challenging and what their specific strategies are. So I think with all of that, we can take your points there, Councillor Sharp, and as part of the meeting, and more than welcome to come and join us if we are meeting with the team to go through some of those concerns you've got in terms of headline reporting.
Paragraph 4.1, that says that 52% of measures achieving or exceeding targets and 31% falling short of target, and that compares with 59% green and 28% amber in the last report. So what that is saying is that the quality is declining.
No, I think the point is that's your interpretation of what's happening. It's against a target. So the context is the target, isn't it? Because let's say, for instance, the target was to triple the quality of a service, but you've only doubled the quality of the service, it would be amber, right? Because your performance is against the target, not against the service level year on year, which is a different measure. Right? So I think for me, the context, the key thing with this is actually bringing it all the way back to the start of the discussion, is to Councillor Price's point, that these measures have to be set against the council plan, because the council plan is the statement of ambition, the statement of intent, the statement of strategy. And what we are doing with these red, amber, green scoring is to see how we're tracking against that ambition. It's not service quality, because some of those targets might not actually be based on service quality. Okay, so look, I know that there's some officers that want to get into it. I'm keen to kind of get us onto budget monitoring, the budget and a key decision document. But we will capture all that. We will try to come back with a fuller response on things. Okay, thank you very much. Which is the month 8 budget monitoring report. Now we have got a public speaker on this as well. So in terms of what we'll do is we will, I'll shortly hand over to Ian, who's just going to introduce it slightly. Then we'll hand over to our public speaker. Then we'll open it up. I guess the only thing I'd say about this is we are now just entering month 11. We are looking at month 8. Cabinet have already reviewed this and had a lot of review of it. So I think the best way to manage this discussion is to talk about very, very headline things that come through rather than diving into detail. We've done a lot of detail in the QAR, but I don't see the kind of value of diving deeply into this, given how many people have already discussed it. What I will do though, I'll hand over to Andrew, to Ian first, and then we'll come to you, Andrew, in a moment, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. The month 8 forecast shows that the position has deteriorated from month 7. There's a forecast overspend of just over £18 million on service budgets. When you apply our contingency to that, that takes it down to 16.38 million. The adverse movement from month 7 to month 8 was 1.8 million. And the main reason for that was the reversal of some savings that we had expected to be able to deliver, but had realised that we were not going to deliver, and so we needed to reflect those in the forecast. The report provides a breakdown of the expenditure across departments, and in the table 2, which is a paragraph 4.3, you can see that the overspend is split between adults, children's and place. The main movement was in adults, and that related particularly to delivery of savings. In other areas, we know that the pressure is arising from ongoing demand pressure for our services and pressure on income, which relates particularly to car parks. Chair, I think that is the summary. There's a lot of detail in this report. There's a detailed breakdown for each service area. So I'm happy to stop there and take questions.
Lovely, thank you very much, Ian. Now I'll hand over to you, Andrew. I can't remember if you've joined us before on one of these panels, but I tend not to give people time limits on speaking, but I do urge concise questions as well. So if you could just bear that in mind, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Moriarty. Can you hear me okay?
I've been corrected, Andrew. Apparently you've 3 minutes. But yes, I'll be fairly relaxed about it, Andrew.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can, yeah.
Okay, good, thanks. Yeah, I'll be brief. I've got 3 questions, which may be a reflection more of my ignorance than the report. I'm looking at this Appendix C, page 22, which I think is 2023-24. And there's a line that says the opening balance is, quote, not adjusted for historical issues. And we know that it's not 10.2 million because of what Councillor Werner famously dubbed fake budgets. So the figure must be more than £10 million different in reality, because you refer to, quote, negative reserves in the SIPFA report. So if you do adjust for historical issues, what are the real opening and closing balances, and why are these figures not included in the table as well? The second question flows from that, is that you then have a table 2 in paragraph 4.3, which moves to the next financial year. So it's using the same figures. So presumably that's also excluding historical issues. So why is that not also including the most up-to-date known figures? And then finally, the contingency budget is listed as about 2.8 million with a 5 million overspend. So that sounds to me like it's an overspend by about 75%. It begs the question, are you building a 75% contingency into the next budget, given that the evidence here seems to suggest that that's the kind of scale you need some flexibility on? So as good governance processes, shouldn't contingencies be more realistic? And what percentage contingency is being used for the next budget? Thank you.
Okay, and I should have probably reminded everyone that when we have public speakers, they're addressing the panel, not officers directly, and then we can put the questions to them. Now, if I can sort of take a bit of privilege here, chair's privileges, I actually think in terms of the budget, the contingency question, Andrew, we will pick that up in the next item, because that's actually something we discussed in the previous scrutiny panel, which I think we can perhaps get an update in terms of the budget setting process. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Ian, but I'm going to pop this question your way. Andrew's questions there about the reflection of the historical errors, and why up-to-date figures haven't been used. Is that a reflection of the fact we're looking at a month 8 report? And if we were looking at a month 10 report, for instance, that would be more accurate, which in effect is what's in the budget papers as we are.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, that's right, Chair. So at the time that this report was being put together, we were still working on the detail of the outturn for the previous year. And as you know, that outturn has only recently been reported. So we weren't in a position to include those numbers at the time that this report came out. Would you like me to answer the question about contingency as well?
Well, we're going to come to it in the budget meeting. If that's all right, Andrew, we'll cover that in there. Thank you very much for that. So throwing it to panel, notwithstanding some of the comments I made in terms of the age of this report, and given the next item and the sort of overall context of where we are with things like budget setting and financial landscape, just if anyone had any clarifications or questions about the month 8 budget report. Councillor Da Costa.
Yeah, there's specifically in relation to this, although I do have obviously the question still outstanding about the forecasting and what steps we take to make sure we get that right. And going back to Andrew's question about the budget, the balance sheets, those, if you like, could be ascribed as historic errors. So are we at the bottom of historic errors? Is our ongoing accounting correct in terms of policy application and checking that policy application is being dealt with effectively? And then again, it's that question about forecasting. But if you want me to ask specific questions, or should we park those questions first?
Yeah, well, let's do that, and then we'll come back to you. And apologies, you're right, the forecasting question, we sort of deferred to this item. So Ian, perhaps the forecasting question, and then a kind of a view on the historical errors, where we're up to. Are we kind of now moving forward with that?
So when making a forecast about a budget, I suppose the thing that you'd need to start with is, have you got your budget right in the first place? And we've just done a review of the chart of accounts. For those who are not accountants, chart of accounts is the way in which we align our accounting arrangements with the accountability arrangements within the organisation. So we're able to identify a particular budget holder with a particular budget and hold them to account for the delivery of the financial targets in relation to that budget. So, have we historically started with an accurate set of budgets? Is a question that needs to be answered. I suspect the answer to that is no, we haven't. So there is almost inevitably then going to be a difference between the forecast that you made and the budget that you started out with. You haven't got your budget right in the first place. So action is being taken to correct that, and we expect to start the next financial year with a new chart of accounts and a correct set of budgets that have been adjusted to reflect what we've learned from the experience of the last year. The next thing is the process that you use in order to make your forecast. You need to understand the underlying activity that's driving the cost. One of our problems has been that we haven't had the systems in place to enable us to understand that activity in a proper way. There was I think quite a long conversation about this at Cabinet, where we were talking about the adults budget and the impact of introducing Mosaic, which is the new system that we've introduced for adults, which gives us a very different kind of grip on the activity within the system. So we now have, for example, workflows within the system. So that enables us to identify where things are not happening or where they're not happening fast enough, and to take corrective action, whereas before that information simply wasn't available, and we were having to use management's own interpretation of the data and spreadsheets to be able to make our forecasts. So what we're anticipating from the change that we've made to adults, and a similar change is coming in children's services, where we're moving to liquid logic, and that's due to go live in April, is a very much better grip on the underlying level of activity in these areas. And as you know, those are our two principal pressure areas where it's very important for us to get a grip on that activity. In addition to that, we know that the changes to the budget are also points where we face risk of non-delivery. So this can apply to growth or to savings. And so where those changes are planned, we need a way of tracking the work that is being done to implement those changes and make sure that those changes happen as planned. Now, again, the way in which we've been doing that historically is that we've been focused on the budget forecast, on what the numbers are telling us in terms of how much we've spent, and we haven't been focusing on the activity itself and whether we've actually completed the actions that were expected to happen so that we would get the outcome that we want. So we're going to change that in the next financial year as well. We're going to focus upon the activity that needs to be undertaken to deliver savings and growth. The consequence of that will be we'll have much earlier warning when things are going wrong. We'll be able to take corrective action, or we'll be able to substitute other savings in place of the ones that are not happening, because we will have time to look at the options around that. So all of those factors play into our forecasting, but there's a really important point here, which is that as a council, our time horizon has been limited by the fact that for some time now, we've been getting 1-year settlements from the government. And so our planning horizon has effectively been 1 year. And we do need to look much further into the future if we're going to solve the budget issues that we're facing. A lot of the solutions take time to implement. You know, think about the challenges of temporary accommodation, for example. You can't solve a problem like that overnight. It requires investment in property. It requires investment in developing the right infrastructure to support people who are at risk of being evicted from their homes. And so long-term financial planning is a really important part of our forecasting activity. We need to do more as a council to do that long-term financial planning. We're going to have the data that we need because of the new systems that we're introducing, and I expect to see a big improvement in our long-term forecasting.
And is there was a point there on like a coding policy as well, wasn't there, in terms of in relation to historical errors? You know, was your question about whether or not we've improved that moving forward?
Am I on? Great. No, I really appreciate the answers, Mr. Colburn, and I hope we've got you on a long-term tenure. You had a fantastic rate, by the way. It's great to see what you're basically saying is that the errors have bottomed out from previous years. You're saying that for adults and children's, we're going to have an accurate budget, but we're not sure about place. You haven't mentioned place because there was a clear overspend on place. And in terms of transformations, what we think we can achieve, then we're not quite there yet in understanding whether that is going to be accurate, but that will develop and come into greater focus during the year. So 25-26 could still be a year for achievement, but also for some errors, and 26-27, by the sound of it, we should be there.
At this point, I can't say that all of the historical errors have come to light. We've done a balance sheet review, and that's where you'd expect to find all of those errors. But, you know, we know that as we are going through the accounts and as we're going through the exercise of introducing new systems to help us with our finances, it's quite likely that we will find some other things that may be wrong. So I wouldn't want to say that that is the end of any historical issues. It's the end of the issues that we've identified. Those have now been corrected, and the reflection of that is in the draft accounts. So, but otherwise, you know, I agree with your summary that what we're saying is there's more to do over the next year to get our budgeting right and to get our budget monitoring right. But I think what I'm saying is that we're undertaking all the right activities to get it under control.
Ask the questions then. So can I just say, look, I have confidence in what you're saying and what and the content, because I've been there, seen there, done it. So I have absolute confidence in you. So thank you for that. If I can ask some specific questions, then let's see, pull my questions up. One is, what is the other debts of 10.568 million or 86? Then in terms of parking income, what's analysis been done to make sure that we get this right in the future, and how can we improve really the parking income? I think, and planning appeals is the last question, is what are we accruing for planning appeals, given that, well, that's just the question, and what's the basis for what we're accruing for costs of planning appeals? Thank you.
Chair, sorry, I just missed the first part of the question. Could
Like the other debt, 10.568 million.
Just while Ian does that, so we'll come. So we've got the debt question, parking, which I think Andrew's appeared online, so we can maybe get an update from him. Parking, and then there was the planning, which I guess Andrew can talk about as well. So perhaps we'll come to you, Andrew, first, just while Ian makes some notes, and give Ian a rest because he's done a lot of talking already.
Yeah, of course, Chair. In terms of In terms of parking, first of all, so I think moving forwards, the position that we're taking and the approach that we need to take is reflecting very carefully on actual income in year, and we've been using that to inform some of our decisions going into next year and part of the budget setting process. So we have seen a gap widening over a period of time. So the projected budget line versus the actual line, unfortunately, is tracking wider apart than we would like to see, and that creates the pressure. What we need to do is we need to close that gap, and we're going to close that gap in part by applying growth to the budget. So in effect, it starts to rebase the expectation to income within a more reliable and reasonable amount. So as we move into next financial year, we should be much closer in terms of our actuals and projected. On planning, you're right, Councillor, and in terms of what you alluded to, we don't have separate budget provision for planning appeals. It is something that we deal with in year and within the budgets. It's a very hard thing to predict year to year, depending on the type and nature of planning applications that come forwards. Then has a different bearing on the types of appeals that we might be faced with, and the associated costs with defending those. So it's a difficult one to predict, and we need to account for those in year when they arise. Hopefully that's answered both of those areas from my point of view.
Sorry, I've gone. Andrew, Mr. Durham, sorry, apologies for that. The brain fog there for a second. Right, so this is sort of a question for Mr. Coleman. Would it not be prudent to make provision for planning appeals? First point. And then the second point is, actually, you haven't answered the question, is what are we doing to sort of grow the income? I didn't quite work out from what you said, what we're doing to grow parking income or to make parking better for our residents. Not quite the same question, but you can answer whichever one you want.
So, sorry, who were you asking that of? Ian there, was it?
Ian was about the prudence of making provision, and Andrew was about actually what are we doing to improve usage, maybe dropping costs, increasing, there's a lot of things. What are we doing?
So if we come back to you, Andrew, just quickly, I mean, is this linked to the car park? I think last meeting we talked about car parking strategy, and we discussed, you maybe might not so much be a strategy, but is there kind of an update on when some, I guess for this panel, it's more about the commercial approach to it than necessarily, because Place will be looking at this as well, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we will always try and generate as best revenue as we can against our car parks. Our revenues are up in contrast, in comparison to this point last year. So we are continuing to increase parking revenue at RBWM. The impact that we're seeing, particularly this year, is that usage is declining. So whilst revenues are up, usage is declining. So therefore, we're not achieving that projected income line, and that's because behaviours are changing, and then we have to challenge ourselves around previous increases to fees and charges and reflecting against those, and perhaps considering a more differential approach to parking fees and charges. That's something we're doing. But there's also various campaign activity, working with businesses, particularly new businesses coming to towns like Maidenhead, where we're in continuous discussion about opportunities to utilise our car parks better and allow those new businesses to park there. And obviously that helps to get the utilisation up and generate income back to the authority. So there's a whole range of things there that we're doing. But yeah, it's a fine balance between increasing fees and charges to generate more income, and the impact that sometimes that has with the way in which people behave and all the choices that they make when it comes to where they choose to park.
And Ian, there's the provision question from that, but also the £10 million debt question, I think, which is one of the original ones that Councillor Da Costa mentioned.
Thank you, Chair. So just dealing with the outstanding sundry debt figure first. We do provide for sundry debt which is over 1 year old at 100%. And there's a sliding scale of the level of provision for debt that's under 1 year old. So there's quite a substantial amount set aside on the balance sheet to cover the risk that we're not going to collect that debt. There is a program in place at the moment, a debt recovery program, which is looking at ways in which we can improve the recovery of those debts. We also need to look at the billing side of things. Are we getting it right when we bill people? Are we getting bills out quickly enough? Are they accurate? Are they being disputed? And all of those things impact on our ability to be able to collect. So that programme is going to be reported on as part of the Council's transformation programme going forward. So there'll be visibility on the improvements that we have planned for it. Planning appeal provisions. Well, we make provisions in relation to planning appeals based upon an assessment on a case-by-case basis. So, I'm not able to comment on any particular cases because I don't have that knowledge, I'm afraid. But
there's no general provision for planning appeals costs. It's just as it happens in year, then you may put in a provision at that point, but within the budgets, there's no general provision.
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
I think just whilst we're on that point, I think it's maybe because I run a small business, that the overdue debt kind of makes me quiver a little bit because, sort of from a cash perspective, I know it won't affect some of the stuff we're talking about. I guess the only thing I'm just curious about is that we've seen that, I'm looking at the bar graph there and I can see it sort of gently increasing. And then when I look at the detail within that, it looks like it's the 2 month to 6 month bit that's increasing and it's sort of increasing over time. So that kind of flags to me, that sort of sticks a flag up, if I'll be honest. But Kevin, do you want to talk to that?
If I may, if I take a particular part, what this report perhaps doesn't show is a significant amount of that sundry debt comes from adult social care, from people who contribute to their own care. You'll all be aware that residents who are getting care from us with less than £23,500, effectively we pay some of their money, but between 10 and 23, they contribute. And we collect that. And at this moment, one of the other things that the Mosaic system will give us is a chance to get a better grip on that process, which is entirely manual at the moment, from the process of us writing out each month to somebody saying, you owe us for this month, however much their contribution is. And it's typically less than £100, but if that would order, they then have to choose to pay us. We've been running a project over the last year, looking at some of those. And what we've identified is if somebody missed a month's payment, perhaps they had a really stressful hospital visit when that landed in their post map, went in their tray, when they got the bill the next month, our manual system wasn't noting they'd missed a month's payment. Quite a lot of that's growing has been the historical piece. So we've cleaned that up this year. We're looking to introduce direct debits with the support of people because many people want to pay their bills. We'll put that in place and that will make it a lot easier to do. What that's also identified for us is that a big proportion of that chunk is in a relatively small number of cases, and forgive me, I'll characterise it, of people choosing not to pay. And in the past, we've perhaps not had some of the skills, Councillor Howard, that you might have been referring to an earlier question, to be strong enough to go and get what the council is due. And we're looking at how we strengthen that piece for a very small number, but make it much easier for everybody else to pay the bill they want to pay. And that, I think, will bring it down. But what I would say, and the point you made, Chair, about the shorter period, in some cases, what families are going through, it's not unusual they don't pay in the first 30 days as soon as that lands, because they're dealing with often the end of life for many of their loved ones. They want to pay it, and we will get it in 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And I'm okay with that, as long as I've got the information that helps Ian and his colleagues have a good understanding of when it's going to be paid. So we've learned some lessons this year, and I'm hopeful we'll bring that down in the adults world.
Right. Well, I don't envy anyone that has to sit in the middle of that manual process. I mean, I knew that the reporting of it was manual. I didn't realise that even the letter writing was manual as well, which is staggering in many respects. So I bet a few people are looking forward to Mosaic coming online. And I guess as well, your point about that middle, that it's like probate and things like that can take time and that, yeah. So no, that's fair comment. Right, Councillor Howard.
Just one quick question. It probably builds on what you were saying before, Kevin, about the idea of people paying, but for care packages, both as child and adult. I was a little astonished last meeting about the size of some of these packages, and having thought on it for a couple of weeks, I was wondering how we, first of all, how we have a spending control on that. I mean, if you are agreeing a package which is, you know, I think you were saying that some of them were £10,000 a week or a month anyway, but it's going to accumulate to hundreds of thousands. So how does that go through the seniority for approving that? And my second part is the other one is when the person in charge of that package from an RBWM point of view goes to meet other stakeholders with, shall we say, fund holding ability, for instance, the NHS or whatever, how are we sure that person is going in there with enough ammunition to make sure that they're not the weakest negotiator in the room, that other people are delivering what they're supposed to? Because I'm hearing from some of my residents where they're feeling, well, one of them has a particular example where he was present during the negotiation, and then a totally different care package came out of the system, which didn't include the NHS contribution. It all put its whole burden on the RBWM contribution and himself. So that sort of situation of being a strong negotiator and a strong admin person to make sure the rest do their share, fair share.
So a number of elements in there. So the first one in terms of governance. So in both adults and children, we have a very clear structure by which the frontline professionals assess the needs of the child or the adult. In adults, which I can talk about in much more detail, against a well-established national framework of need, which typically comes out with effectively a value. And that value is offered, first of all, as a direct payment. So if paid somebody, here's how much it will cost. Do you wish to take that money and work with your network to make that happen? Not many of our residents choose that because it's quite hard work, but we want more to be able to do that. Depending on the value then, effectively, that frontline worker has to have the package then agreed by levels of management. And we currently have a 3-stage process. Anything up to £400 per week for adults is signed off by the service manager in principle. I'll come back to that in a moment. Anything up to £2,500 goes to the 2 assistant directors. Anything above £2,500 has to be signed off by me. At the moment, we've suspended that £400 limit, and all of those, anything up to £2,500, goes to our assistant directors, exactly as Ian was saying, to make sure we've got an understanding of exactly what is going through our processes. And again, the Mosaic system, which we've talked about a number of times tonight, is making sure that all of those decisions are recorded, but recorded with that granularity of exactly what is in the package and for how long, so that we can use the workflows that Ian mentioned earlier to feed back to the frontline worker. It's now 6 weeks, review whether that element has served its purpose. Do we need to continue with it? So that's the first bit. I'm comfortable we've got a good governance process. We've got to learn to use it. The point you make about, is everybody paying their fair share? I think I've been on record as saying before, it's challenging working with our NHS colleagues who are under significant financial pressure as we are. And in particular, in the area of continuing healthcare, we have had some challenges with them effectively making their fair commitment. We've got a good escalation process, that escalation process that goes all the way up this organisation into theirs with matching levels. I've had my say, and Stephen online has had his say with their chief executive as well, to ensure that they are not making savings at our expense. It continues to be an ongoing monitoring process, and indeed the Association of Directors of Adult Services have identified in the South East in particular that South East NHS groups are effectively perhaps the least giving in the country. And so there's work at a system level as well to try and get that right. Your observation that was made by somebody you were talking to who's seeing a different package, we see that play out both ways. That review process I described does sometimes change packages after they've been discussed at the front line with the person assessing their needs. Sometimes it's right and sometimes it's because we're arguing with it. So again, the system will give us clarity on whether we are getting contributions as we would expect with the data to argue, is what I'm hoping to be able to have out of the Mosaic reports in due course.
I hear what you say about Mosaic, and to be honest, I echo Chris's point about handwritten invoices and handwritten letters is just ridiculous at this stage, and it shows the lack of investment that's been going on. I like the escalation process, and I think that was good. The thing which I am a little unsure about is that stakeholder, the other fund holders around the table. And whilst I take your point about packages can change, I don't particularly want to get onto the detail of the person who spoke to me, but it was the fact that suddenly they were asked to pay the money that was promised by another one of them. And they were asked by RBWM, not the NHS. And I'm also sort of, when I'm looking at Frimley especially, I'm seeing that they are underspending their budget on supporting people in their own homes and care packages in their homes. And that then means that probably us or our residents are filling up the gap on their behalf. And I'm not sure what Frimley's doing with their cash, but I'm sure it isn't something we would be very happy that they're doing if we're losing out.
If I may just come back, the reason why the residents will hear from us is we hold the statutory duty to ensure they have care. So if another organisation does not fill that gap, we have the statutory duty to fill it, which is why we are effectively the provider of last resort, which is why they hear from us. And I won't apologise for doing that because that's right. Your observation around the spend on continuing healthcare is also accurate, that actually it's an area where the health system is looking to save money, and indeed their planning guidance for the financial year coming out has asked all ICSs across the country to look at the median level of spend and make sure they're below it. Now, forgive me, my understanding of numbers is you can't all be below a median. So I'm quite interested as to how that's actually going to play out over the next year.
Right, thank you very much. Well, I haven't got any other speakers lined up, so cool. Right, is that everything on the budget monitoring? So thank you for the responses. I think the big thing for me, apart from some of the specifics in that, is actually Councillor Da Costa's point about forecasting and systems, and I think the big takeaway from that is the positive measures on systems that are going to help us manage this. And Mosaic has had a couple of mentions tonight, so I'll be looking forward to seeing how that plays out. Let's move on to item 6 then. So this is the 25-26 budget. So just again to set the scene, we on the 20th of January had our full session on scrutiny, and just for the benefit of people not on the panel and the general public and anyone watching. One of the things that I've been working on with the Vice Chair is to kind of summarise that meeting rather than rely on Cabinet to pour through minutes. I kind of tried to summarise that. I have sent a draft around. Of course, as soon as that draft is finalised, we will publish that recommendation, but I didn't want to do that in the first instance whilst we work out the detail. Now, of course, since that meeting, and actually in that meeting, we were talking about timescales, and there was some concerns that it might push into the end of February. Well, as I'm sure everyone in this room and watching is aware, we now have that clarity on moving forward. I did speak with officers prior just to work out the best thing that we can do in this what is intended to be quite a small item because of the amount of scrutiny we've already given. And it was about whether or not that scrutiny is still relevant. And my view, having spoken to people, is it is, because my understanding, and Ian, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, is that in effect, the spend part of that budget hasn't changed and won't change. What changes is the is the makeup of how that is funded. And that's what's changed now with the council tax decision. So I think what we'll do is pass to Ian, just unless, well, I'm assuming Ian, but Stephen, feel free to put your hand up if you want to contribute as well, but help us understand where we are now, what the, in terms of process, what's happening, and just to give us a sort of sense of the kind of impact on that document that we've already looked at that this week's update has given us.
The local government settlement was published on Monday, and we were one of only 6 councils that were given permission to increase their council tax above the cap. The permission we have been given is to increase our council tax by 4% above the cap, which would put us at 8.99% increase. We were actually asking for a 25% increase. And the reason why we were asking for a 25% increase was that we have a very large structural deficit in the budget. That's caused by the fact that our council tax income is lower than it needs to be in order for us to meet all of our statutory obligations as a council. And we have very little in the way of opportunity to find further savings because the council has already delivered on nearly all the opportunities that there are for us to reduce the budget over the course of the last decade, during which it's kept council tax low. So we are, of course, continuing to look for efficiency savings and opportunities, but we don't think that we will be able to close the budget gap with that alone. So what impact does the government's decision have on us? Well, first of all, I think it's a helpful acknowledgement on the part of the government that we do have a structural problem with our budget. It's been very clear that it's only given this help concerning the council tax level to those councils where it did believe that there was a fundamental structural problem with the budget. So, and I think it's helpful that they've acknowledged that by giving us that permission. But it does mean that we will have to borrow the difference in order to have a balanced budget next year. We're currently working through what the implications of that are for the amount that we will need to borrow. But what we do know is that whatever we borrow, we will have to pay for, in the sense that there will be interest charges on the borrowing, and we will have MRP charges that we will have to charge the revenue budget over the next 20 years, which means that that is added to our budget gap. So our revised ask of the government will have to take into consideration those additional borrowing costs.
Thank you very much. Stephen, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of comments to sort of, I guess, build on what Ian was saying. I think there's a couple of things which I think we can take from the settlement which was announced on Monday. First of all, we're only one of only 6 councils that have been given permission to raise council tax above cap without having issued a Section 114 notice. And that, I think, is significant. The statement also reveals that only half of those councils that put forward a request for a council tax increase above cap were actually given permission, which I think those two things together show that we, as an authority, put forward a convincing case to government, backed up by evidence, and that the government has agreed with that and given us permission. And it won't have taken that decision lightly. It certainly wouldn't, and I'm talking to someone who spent 10 years of my career in the Treasury, it wouldn't have given us this permission if it didn't think we had a clear case and we were credible as an authority. It also shows that government agrees that we have a structural problem in our budget that cannot be fixed through savings, income and transformation alone. If it did think that we could fix our problems through just doing things differently, it wouldn't have agreed to this. So I think both of those points are important to emphasize. And I think there was, at the end of Angela Rayner's statement, it kind of, I guess it puts the government's decisions into context, because clearly the government is trading off trying to support councils, allowing councils to take local decisions, but also clearly it's concerned about the level of tax nationally. In Angela Rayner's statement, she says where we've agreed council tax increases, it's only for councils with amongst the lowest levels of council tax in the country, and where we expect even after these increases, residents still be paying less than the average compared to similar councils. So that is very much the case with us, even with a 8.99% increase. If full council decides to levy that when it goes to full council, we will still be well below the national average. And then Angela Rayner goes on to say, at a national level, even with these increases, the overall level of tax increase across the country is not expected to exceed last year's levels. So that's an important point, because clearly at a national level, the government is effectively pegging council tax increase to last year for obvious reasons, I think probably for political reasons. And therefore, that's created a kind of ceiling against which the government hasn't been prepared to go. And the fact that we are only one of 6 councils that within that, I guess, that imposed ceiling that the government's put on its decision, we have been given a council tax increase, I think then also reiterates the fact that we do have a structural problem and that we have made a convincing case to government. But as Ian said, it doesn't solve our problems, and the impact will be that the ratio of borrowing will unfortunately have to go up.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian and Stephen. So I'll open up to panel members. Just as a reminder, I don't think it's worth going over old ground from some of the discussions that we had only a few weeks ago. This is more about looking at some of the implications as a result of the latest news. The other point of admin as well is that there were some questions that were outstanding from the previous meeting. One in particular was on pension contributions and the volume of it. But that we're updating minutes as a result of follow-ups on that. So I think in this meeting, we can discuss some of the things that we've just heard about and any thoughts we've got. We'll make sure that by cabinet that we've updated our viewpoint to reflect some of that and also some of the outstanding questions as well. Okay, so can I hand over to Councillor Price, please?
Thank you. So some of this is questions and some of it's concerns. So I understand that we've been in negotiation with the government for 9 months or more. I understand it wasn't a case of going and saying, what do we do? And then they left it in isolation to do it, but there was lots of conversations that went between the two. And in that process, we said that what we wanted to do is to put the tax up by 25%. And I understood the financial logic behind all of that and could see how that could get us out. That was published. So residents who heard about it were very worried, a lot of them, and how on earth am I going to pay that? So to find that having got all the residents, well, those who knew about it, upset and concerned about how they were going to pay it. And, I heard people saying, well, I'm going to be visiting my husband in prison because on principle he's not going to pay it. So things like that, residents have been in tears, is to then find at the last stage, suddenly it's not 25%, it's not half of that, but it's gone down to 9%. So I'm just puzzled if there's been this to and fro negotiation going on all the time. How is it we have this incredible diversity between what we put down, which on paper, that was how us to get out of the financial mess that we're in. So I'd like to try to understand that. In order to balance the budget for next year, we have to take out a loan but we don't know for certain we're going to get that from the government. I've understood from what we've heard, but you might say, no, we've been assured we will get that and that will balance. That will give us a loan of, I don't know, another 100, just an enormous loan. I understand we haven't got assets to pay that back. So no bank would give us a loan under those conditions, but this is the government, so it's just la-la land. But how on earth are we going to get out of the financial mess long term? Short term, right, we've got an answer for the next year, but long term we haven't. Our financial council plan, the prime aim, the aim that was over above everything else, is to put us on a secure financial footing. That now hasn't happened, so that puts all of that up in the air. And I'm assuming to now look at changing the figures, we're going to have to put more expense into the loan repayment. But on the other hand, are we going to say, well, in fact, not as many residents need support that we thought they were going to have, so we can actually cut back on that support? So will those two balance out, so it's not going to make the budget out of kilter? I will say, as a resident who tries to communicate facts and not opinions and no political swing because I'm an independent anything, I've been left flummoxed because I haven't had information to do that. I've read lots of other things that are people putting out, and I thought, well, that's not true, but I can't categorically say, sorry, residents, you're being misled by something, because I haven't had the information in order to inform residents. And we had a conversation in November, is that councillors can be used as a communication tool to residents if we're given the information. And I feel I'm bereft of information in order to do that role. And yeah, that's really difficult. So the gap in communication has been filled by people who don't know the information, and that's all out there. And now we've got the task of trying to change the story to what the truth is, whatever the truth is. So those are my concerns.
Ian, I might come to you in the first instance. I kind of feel like your first point in your, actually, Stephen, do you want to come in?
Well, I guess I was just going to maybe respond at a broad level, and maybe Ian might want to follow up. But I think it was made really clear to us by government, Councillor Price, that this was only going to be a one-year settlement. And that's a really important point, because if government had said, you know, we're looking at this over a 2 or 3 year period, we would have put a case to government along a medium-term case. But it was made very, very clear that you're only going to get a one-year settlement. So we effectively put what, you know, we came up with and used the data and the numbers to back up what we needed from a one-year settlement for the council to be sustainable. And that's what led to the 25%. And that's backed up by the numbers and by the evidence and what is reflected in the report that went to Cabinet and here before Christmas. So there was no attempt to try and game it. That was us as an authority being transparent about what we needed to be sustainable. That being the case, I think as an authority, we took a decision to be completely transparent about that with the people of the borough. And I personally think that was the right decision, because, you know, we've got to be transparent about our financial challenges and the scale of what's needed to get us out of that. What's happened now is clearly, and you know, and I guess what I was trying to say in my opening comments, the other thing that the government have said in their statement this week, we've agreed a limited number of requests for a council tax increase, and in all cases have not agreed to the full amount requested. So no council has got what they asked for here. Every council, I'm assuming, has just done what we've done and put in at the ask of government. But this is where I was trying to say at the beginning, the government then has a wider set of things to trade off against. And one of those is the overall council tax burden on the country. And the fact that it has kind of pegged its overall council tax increase to be no higher than last year, I think is I assume because the government doesn't want to be accused of increasing taxes in the current climate even further. That's not a decision for us to take. That's a decision for government to take. All we can do as a local authority is put our case to government about what we need. And that's what we did. And throughout this, we were beholden on government to give us that permission. And they've given us, I guess the highest they think they can give us within that overall envelope that they are working towards.
On the more about the medium-term plan in effect, and size of size of loan, which I'm sure is going to be difficult to answer because it's still a moving feast at the moment. But I might point back to the conversation we had in the previous meeting, which there were some questions about short-term versus long-term debt. We already know we've got a high interest payment that we pay every year. Now that's going to go up, which is going to, I guess, have a knock-on effect on future asks of government. So maybe talk to that a little bit as much as you can at the moment.
I suppose the frustrating thing is that the problem that we are facing here does require us to be able to plan in the medium and long term to find our way out of it. And we're unable to do that because we're in a situation where the government is only in a position to be able to give us a one-year settlement, and there's a spending review that has to happen before they can commit to any further arrangements that might help us to manage our problem. So the difficulty that we have is that we know that borrowing the money in order to fund our revenue expenditure is not a sustainable solution. I will have to comment upon the sustainability of our budget position in the budget report, and you'll have my advice about that. So we are in a very difficult position in the sense that we don't have a clear view of what's going to happen in years 2 and 3 of our medium-term financial plan. What we'll be showing in the budget report is that there's a deficit in those future years, and we don't yet have a way of closing that deficit. We are in the hands of the government in that respect, for the reason that I said before, that we simply don't have the capability to be able to reduce our expenditure by the degree that would be needed in order to achieve a balanced budget, because we would then be in breach of some of our statutory responsibilities, and we'd be putting residents at risk. Whilst I suppose we could choose to do that, we would face judicial review almost immediately, maybe even before the budget was agreed. So so it's a very difficult situation, and the way out of it is quite simply that we have to be patient, and we have to see what the government is going to do following the spending review. The context of this nationally is that we are not alone. We know that. The funding mechanism for local authorities is broken, and has been heading in that direction for quite some time. So it needs to be reconsidered, and a sustainable solution for funding local government properly and in a way that enables longer term planning has to be found, but we don't know what that will be.
A few weeks at council, councillors are asked to approve or not approve the budget, and we have to have a balanced budget. And what really crystallised in my mind from the cabinet meeting and what was said is that the data that is available to officers to produce robust forecasts is not there yet. You're taking steps to get it there, and it will get better, but it's not there yet. And certainly there was less available, say 3 months ago or 4 months ago when you did that budget. So that budget is built on, I'll call rocky foundations, because the data that your managers need just isn't there. So the only way to compensate that surely must be to have a much larger contingency fund than has been put in the past. I personally have to make a judgment to say whether I think that's a balanced budget or not in February. So I have to be confident that despite all the risks we have in the world that are going on, and the fact that we haven't got data that is enough for managers to be confidently say what their forecast is, that you've built in enough reserves to cope with that. And we're not going to end up this time next year with the budget yet again 20% overspent. And that's the dilemma I personally have.
And I think that's a good point as well. And I'm sort of noting that our public speaker from the previous item talked a bit about contingency as well. So, I know that you said in the last meeting that you were going to review contingency and reserves. Is there an update at this stage, or is it one that's going to be going to cabinet, or both?
So I'll be providing advice on these points in my section 25 statement, which will be part of the budget report. I think these are all fair points that I'm taking into consideration. Certainly, the level of general reserves is something that I am considering very seriously. The level that was put into the budget was 10 million. I'm reviewing whether we should have a larger sum. And in terms of contingency, we are tightening up the budget monitoring arrangements. We're putting in place much more rigorous arrangements to get assurance that we will deliver our savings. So I'm feeling a bit more confident about our ability to be able to deliver the budget. We have a new chart of accounts, and we have built quite a lot of growth into the base to reflect the risks that we know we've got around the budget in the current year. So, but I'm also reviewing the level of contingency in that context.
Thank you very much, Councillor Price. Has anyone else got a Councillor Da Costa? Thank you.
Big question. The EFS that we're looking for, this is going to be based on whatever budget we put forward, is that correct? So for example, I mean, I'm from a corporate treasury background, and when we look at risk management, I look at our risks and the way SEMA looks at risks and the way, and I think that's not quite right. It's not big enough. So if our reserves were a lot bigger, that means we're having a bigger deficit and we're looking to capitalise all of that. Is that correct?
So the current position is that we've got negative reserves. So we cannot operate as an organisation without any resilience at all. So we must build up some reserves. We will have to borrow in order to do that. So whatever amount we decide to have as a general reserve will effectively be borrowing the money in order to create that reserve.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the key things that we need to understand, and that residents will want to understand, is the size of the debt that we have and what the plan is to repay it. So I think it's really important that there's a plan for that in place, and I'd like to understand what that is, or how that's shaping up at the moment.
So there will be a section in the budget report looking at the key ways in which we'll be able to do that. And that's primarily through disposal of assets. So there are some projects in the pipeline which members will already be aware of that are likely to generate substantial capital receipts for the council. Those capital receipts will be deployed to pay down the debt.
Disposal of assets is a one-off thing, and by doing that, you actually leave the council overall in a much weaker position than you were beforehand. So it seems that what you're saying is that paying off the debt is actually going to leave the council in a worse position than it was in previously. So really what the council should be doing is looking at generating income and looking at ways of paying off debt through income rather than through asset sales, which don't leave the council in a good position. So I'm really very concerned about what you've said there, because I think the options moving forward for the council don't sound very good for an area like this. This should be a high class, high quality council, and what seems to be happening is that it's being turned into a very, potentially in future, a very weak and very unstable council.
The council has, apart from council tax, of course, very limited opportunities to be able to substantially increase its income. We're talking about a budget deficit in the region of 20 million plus. So our ability to raise 20 million plus per annum is extremely limited without being able to put up the council tax. You know, we're talking about very large amounts of debt here, somewhere in the region, I think it's about 300 million by the time you add on the borrowing that we're going to need. Any opportunities that we have to raise income could, of course, be used to bring down that debt over time, but it's very unlikely it would make a substantial dent in it. We are going to have to look at asset disposals in order to find a way of paying back the debt. Really, I can't see any alternative to that, I'm afraid.
Okay. I mean, I suppose you noted, Councillor Sharp, in terms of some of your concerns. I mean, I think the one thing I would add to it, though, is that in previous meetings, we've been frustrated with the lack of selling assets to pay down the debt. And now we're saying we don't want to sell assets. We've talked tonight about income opportunities, but we had an answer on, from me tonight, actually quite a detailed answer on what income opportunities actually exist. And I think probably it's fair to say that the main revenue opportunity was the increase of council tax that now is not possible. So I share your frustration that, you know, it leaves a position where that debt just seems to build and becomes very difficult to pay off. But yeah, okay. So let's move on to Councillor Howard.
Completely agree that paying off the debt by asset sales is the obvious logical thing to do. You're paying more in interest than you are gaining in the value of the property, so you use it to pay down your debt. First question is, roughly how much value is our property portfolio worth? Is it anywhere close to 300 million quid?
I'm sorry, Chad, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll have to give you a written reply to it.
Okay, because I would suggest that if it's not near 300 quid, it's a bit of an academic question about whether or not we do it and what we do. But I hate to say it, is that it's very clear, and to paraphrase Margaret Thatcher, we've been living beyond our means and we now have to pay it. And we have to suck it up. And one thing I'm most disappointed in is this continual short-termism from both central government and almost everybody on the, shall we say, the public sector side, which is very broad, I'm sorry, but it's all about 1 year. And if you and people talk about running the public sector like a business, and the one thing you don't do in a business is run it by a year. You run it over multiple years. And the way that the government has reacted this time, we're just going to be going back there in 12 months' time, aren't we? It's obvious. It's wasted everybody's time. We've incurred extra costs, and that short-term attitude is costing taxpayers across the country money, all of us. Whereas you could do the job once and do it well and come up with a solution. It's ridiculous. And I agree with you, it's very frustrating.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, I mean, I raised my concerns about this 25% council tax increase. I mean, I wasn't in favour of that at all, and I think we're in a lot better place than previous meetings. I think officers should be congratulated. You've done a good job to get this 4% increase above base secured, so that's good. Get some money from government. Obviously, we need that to balance the budget, which is good. I raised a point about getting the debt wiped. I mean, we've got an unsustainable level of debt. It's been built up over the last decade. The interest charges are £18 million. I mean, my only point is that I just want some reassurance that conversations are continuing with central government for support. I know there is a £69 billion national government cash injection into local authorities to support them. I think it's about 3.5% above what it was previously. But what I would like to ask is financial settlement or one-off payments from government. Are these being explored and pushed, and see if we, because what we really need is we can sell the assets. We haven't got the money in assets. I've looked around. I've seen the portfolio. We can't generate nowhere near that sort of money. The capital receipts, they're not going to come in. The borough has engaged in 5-7 years of speculative development, and we've come off really badly with these historic decisions. So you know, are you continuing to negotiate, and is there still a bit of hope? I mean, I'd like to come in the next meeting and you know, get another little windfall from government. That's what I'd like to see. Thank you.
The timing of the information that we're getting from government is really entirely dependent upon the plan that they have for managing the economy and public sector spending. And the spending review is not going to happen until the spring. We're then, so up until the point where that spending review has taken place, we have no more information, and we're not likely to get any more information about what the future holds for us. But we are continuing to talk to the government about our position, and we are continuing to make our case, and we'll continue to push that. But we're in their hands in terms of what they come up with for their strategy for managing what is, after all, a crisis, not just for us, but for the whole of local government.
Thank you very much. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Councillor Teasey.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of short points, hopefully. First of all, can I just almost thank and congratulate officers for the enormous amount of work that I know they all put in to getting us where we are today, and the fact that we are one of just 6 councils in the whole country that have been allowed to raise council tax above the cap at all points to the work that has been put in to put a strong case. And it is interesting how the government does appear to have accepted our spending plan, except they have disputed how we get that money, and have obviously, it's entirely their decision. They've said, well, yes, you can have this amount in council tax rise now, and you have to borrow the rest. And I share the frustration of many of others, how this just seems to be kicking the can down the road. There doesn't seem to be any proper thought here. And as others have said, I think this will add to debt, and debt is bad. I think it's really sad. Look, we can just bemoan the fact that debt was sort of 50 million for many years, having been acquired from when the Royal County of Berkshire split up. It was acquired from that. We had no debt, I think, before that. And then it rocketed to over 200 million now. And it's, but because of previous administrations, and it is quite interesting here, what's the plan to repay the debt? Well, that's a very good question. I'd love answers on a postcard here, because it seems that certain members, they don't like council tax rises. I don't like council tax rises, but I have, as an accountant, I have to be realistic. They don't like putting up parking charges or any charges, but then they say that we need to generate more income. How exactly? I think.
Sorry, Councillor, can we
Yeah, sorry.
Can we get to a question?
Just one last question. So my only question, moving straight to it, sorry, is some councils have had, I think, the audacity to ask the government to write off their debt. I know that, I think nearby Surrey. And if that happens, I just would like officers to say, well, look, put our case that we should be fair. And if other councils are having their debt written off, we should be treated the same way. Can just have some sort of assurance over that. Thank you.
If that were an option that was on the table, then yes, we would absolutely seek to explore that with the government.
I think that's a fairly straightforward answer. I could probably have answered that one, but yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Da Costa.
Thank you again. Mr. O'Donnell, I apologise. A resident just pointed out I got your name wrong earlier on in the meeting, so my apologies publicly to you for getting it wrong. The question is this: you were obviously you're going through a lot of heartache, all of you as casino officers, trying to unturn every stone. What's the LGA's position on this, and what sort of support and resource are they providing in terms of campaigning government against lobbying government for support?
Well, the LGA is a lobbying body that represents a very wide range of local authorities. So its position is generally tempered by the fact that it has to represent a very broad set of interests. However, it has commented on the local government settlement. It is seeking a more substantial answer to the challenges that local government is facing. And, at this stage, I think it recognises the constraints that the government is facing in terms of the availability of headroom on council tax. But it's looking for a more radical solution to local government funding in the longer term. And, I have to say, it's hard to disagree with the idea that a new way of funding local government for the future needs to be found.
Okay, thank you very much. Doesn't look like we've got any more speakers on this one. So thanks everyone for the contributions. What I've just spoke to Mark, we're hoping to have the minutes of this meeting ready to review early next week. What I'll do is I'll commit to updating that draft note as soon as I can after that, so that we can turn that around and give Cabinet enough time to review that alongside our minutes as well. Okay, Ian.
I've got an answer to the question that was raised about what's the value of our property. So this information is available in our draft accounts in the balance sheet page, which is page 10. And there's a series of notes that apply to these accounts which give the detail. But we have £81 million worth of investment property. Our overall property, plant and equipment, which is effectively our operating estate, and the equipment that's associated with that is 415 million. But clearly we wouldn't be able to deliver services if we were to dispose of our operating estate. So really it's the investment property that we would be looking at in terms of disposals.
Thank you very much. Quite a quick turnaround for a written response. Thank you very much. So that now brings us on to the next item, but given recent, in keeping with the rules of these meetings, we've got to vote to carry on onto another agenda item because we're just coming up to 10 o'clock. We've got one more item on there. Now, I am conscious that we have got a public speaker who's been waiting quite patiently to speak on this item, not to sway the vote in any way, but I'm quite happy to lose the work programme item, so this would be the last item. Would anyone object to us continuing beyond 10 o'clock? Yeah, happy? Happy. Okay, thank you very much. You'll be pleased to hear, Andrew, having sat there patiently. So we'll move on to item 7. Now, I suppose with what I've just said in mind, this is an item that could grow arms and legs, I guess, as a broad discussion. So I just kind of want to set the context of this item before we dive into it. Those will remember, I think it was the September, doing that from the top of my head, September council meeting. And it was actually as a consequence of Mr. Hill's public question that Councillor Beaumange gave an update on a contract extension decision. And in that, he said it might be something that Scrutiny can take a look at. I spoke to Councillor Beaumange about that and said, you know, I'm happy for it to come into this group. I updated our panel at the last meeting that we were going to look at that today, hopefully, all being well and subject to officers being able to turn it around, which I'm very grateful that they have. It was a very short turnaround. It's focusing in on key decisions, and typically with a panel like this, key decisions, there's a kind of call-in process. I just want to make it really clear that's not what's happening here. You know, this isn't about the decision and calling it in and challenging the decision. This was about the process of that decision making and what we have learned as a result. This is a process discussion. To be very, very transparent, the questions I asked of the monitoring officer in producing this paper were whether the extension of the contract is a key decision, and if not, why not? And if so, what would have been the proper process to follow? What the implications of it not being followed? And generally, what have we done since this has come to light? Have changes been made at all? I think it's important to be clear on that was the ask. And then we've subsequently got the report. Now, I'm also very conscious that this is an emotive topic for a lot of people. This whole project is a very important item for lots of people in the borough. But I do want to keep us as tightly to that context as we can. This is about the process on it. Now, Andrew, you've heard that as well. So, you know, I would sort of urge you to take that in mind as well. Reminder on the 3 minutes on this. And I know that you've submitted some information in advance, so I appreciate your work on that. So if it's okay with you, Andrew, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Moriarty. The test of a key decision in law is very straightforward. Is it an executive decision with either significant financial effects or is significant in terms of its effect on communities living in 2 or more wards? The committee is required by law to give the word significant effect their ordinary plain English common sense meaning. In June 2021, the former CEO Duncan Sharkey wrote to Carla Holmes promising to extend the long stop date by 2 years on the golf club contract, which guaranteed Carla around £119 million. So why did Duncan Sharkey think £119 million risk, the size of the council's entire annual income, was a risk that was best value in residents' interests to extend? That, in my view, is a Vegas-sized risk decision, let alone a key decision. And we don't need to guess his reasons, because Mr. Sharkey had a legal duty to record his reasons for extending this contract, either in the statutory key decision report to Cabinet or at least in a published officer decision note. But according to the monitoring officer tonight, the former CEO chose not to comply with either of those duties. He didn't record his decision or his reasoning as mandated under Regulation 7 of the Openness of Local Government Bodies Regulations 2014. Councillor Beaumange called this process a, quote, affront to democracy and a key decision, precisely because his decision did have significant potential financial and community-wide effects. Is the committee really going to say that the lead member for governance is wrong? In my email, you can see that Regulation 7.3c gave Mr. Sharkey a duty to record the detail of, quote, alternative options. Most council reports present alternative financial options, and the obvious financial option here was to do nothing. He needed to consider the option of letting the contractual long stop date lapse in 2023.
That's 1 minute remaining.
This could have incurred costs, or it could have allowed the council to the financially valuable opportunity to end the contract or renegotiate this hopelessly one-sided bad contract from scratch in 2023 to get the public a much better deal. It is the existence of these financial options that makes it by definition a key decision. But the monitoring officer tonight does not reference those options to renegotiate or terminate, and so reaches the erroneous conclusion that the decision was not significant. We already know that Mr. Sharkey had little or no financial evidence to support his decision, because SIPFA said we're not able to be confident in the reliability of the anticipated costs and benefits. So I asked the committee to do two things. Firstly, this governance committee can and should write to Mr. Sharkey to ask him what evidence he relied on and why he failed to comply with Regulation 7. And secondly, this committee should resolve that Councillor Mange was correct to identify a key decision with significant financial and social effects, so that residents are protected in the future from any senior officer taking £119 million risks with unrecorded rationales. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Do you want to speak first?
Look, the monitoring officer is not here tonight. I think we need to be really careful about discussing the actions of a previous officer who is not in the room this evening to discuss this issue. And I'm putting forward that view without a legal representative in the room. That personally feels very uncomfortable for me that we are discussing a historical decision without that person in the room. So I'm not comfortable with this debate.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I'd echo that in the sense that I think to Mr. Hill's point there, we're not a governance panel, we're an overview and scrutiny panel, and we are looking at process here. I think the key element of this is looking at this decision in particular. It's kind of the context by which we're looking at this process as opposed to looking at the decision itself. I'll remind people of that. You've heard Mr. Hill's contribution there. What I would ask panel members to bear in mind what Stephen said there. I would like to focus in on process. I will open it up to panel, but I will just echo the concern that Stephen's talked about there. If we start veering off, I'll intervene and try and keep us on track. So with that in mind, I'll give this over to panel members.
I think that the fact that we're here talking about a process means that the process was unclear. And therefore, if it's unclear, it's a weak process. The question is whether or not the process has been proved substantially enough to avoid a situation like this potentially occurring in the future. And so I think is that there are two ways that my thought goes on this. Is that the first one is that if we believe that the process was right in the first place, then we should be able to obtain the documents to prove it was right, which seems not to be true. And if the process was weak, then we're here listening to questions about why the process wasn't followed. So my point on this is that I do think the process was weak. It was obviously not specific enough. The word of significant means different things to different people, and hence it's a bad word. You should be using a number of which something where over a value of X, where there is any involvement of a number over that, the process should be triggered to do something along a certain line. But when you leave it to people's judgment, two people will have different judgments at different times. So I don't feel it's fair for present officers to be left dangling in a potential situation where they're not being supported by a firm and correct process, which is quantifiable, not qualitative, and is something that we can all turn around and say, yes, it was done.
Thank you very much. Councillor Price.
I'm not a legal expert. I try to understand this. I think I've understood there are two things that have to be considered. One is, does this affect more than one ward? And this development does affect more than one ward. And in here, we're told it only affects one ward. So, for example, we have been told that in order to fund, this is now from about 2 years ago, but I remember it, to fund all the infrastructure, the sole money that would have gone to other wards across the borough is going to have to go into this ward to fund all of the infrastructure. So there we are, it affects all the other wards, the decision to go ahead with this. So I think that's one of the criteria, as I understand. And the other is the size of this decision. The decision, I can't remember how many millions of pounds, but it is an enormous decision. The decision to extend it meant this project of this size goes ahead. If the decision had been not to extend it, then that would have had an impact of these hundreds of millions of pounds. So I look at this and I just think, how can that not be deemed a key decision, which then should have gone the proper process of being open and transparent? So that's how I've looked at this as the decision. Right.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you. Given that we've had the recommendation from the Chief Executive and that we need the monitoring officer in the room to discuss this in any meaningful way, I'd suggest that I don't understand why she's not here right now anyway, because this has been on the agenda and so could have been contemplated that presence of the monitoring officer would be necessary for this item. But I would propose that we defer this discussion until we've got the monitoring officer in the room so that we can have the proper conversation, because otherwise it seems that we're just skirting around the issues.
I'm not going to take that forward if that's okay, and the reason being that the ask was for a briefing note. I think Stephen's point about monitoring officer, well, actually, I think the words, the sort of legal representative was in relation to speaking about people in the room and not being in the room to defend themselves. So I think that, unless Stephen wants to correct me on that, I think that was his point, not that we couldn't have discussion with that officer. I understand your concern about, having that. What we can do is get any outstanding queries, a written response. But this is about the process of key decisions, not about this and what happened in this particular key decision. We've got the opinion of the monitoring officer in the report. Some people might not agree with it, but that is the opinion of the monitoring officer. I'm keen to talk about the discussion, so I don't really want to extend this into another meeting. I don't want to elongate it. So I take your point, but I'm at this moment I'm not prepared to do that. So, Councillor Teasey.
Thank you, Chair. I would actually like to start by echoing what Councillor Sharp has just said, in fact, that if we are being asked, if we are, I looked at the thing and this was, I was confused, and I'm glad that there's been further, Mr. Hill and others have discussed this further, because it was just saying, well, we need to note this. Okay, fine. If we have to make a decision, we need the right people in the room to help us make that decision. And if we're talking about if we're talking about what is essentially a legal issue, well, then we leave the legal person here. So it does seem rather odd. For what it's worth, I don't know. On the one hand, it does appear that this deed of variation, it was an extension rather than actually committing to the thing. So, in my layman's, I'm not a lawyer, in my layman's term, may or maybe not be a key decision, I don't know. It looks like 3.2, it's that the decision notice wasn't published and we've improved processes to make sure that they are published. That's nice. So if that's all we're saying about process, excellent. I mean, I don't really have anything else to add because I'm not a lawyer here. I'm sorry.
No, and I think that's a fair comment, Councillor Teasey, in response to your question about the objective of discussing it tonight. I mean, I think apart from anything, it's about getting this into a public forum. And this is the way of doing that. I think that's probably why it's more of a noting of report. I think some of the points that Councillor Howard and Councillor Price have made help us sort of give our view on, you know, where we think this could be strengthened, given that there's already been some work on that. So no, take your point there. Councillor Da Costa.
Yeah, I'm completely new to the panel, just been appointed a day or so ago. So, I mean, my view would be that this is a significant issue, one that we can and must learn from. So we really should take this either to another meeting or when the monitoring officer is present and we're really clear about what the events were and where the lack may or may not be, so that we can then consider, well, actually, you know, we agree that perhaps we should be writing for the sake of accountability, public money we're talking about here, public risk, to the said individual, and also question or look to strengthen future processes. So I do think we need to explore this further.
Okay, and I'm going to repeat what I said before, and again, I accept it. We are looking at the process, not the decision. Okay. So there might be another forum, there might be another platform to challenge the decision. I don't know. I'm not a legal expert either. But what we are here to look at is the process by which key decisions are made in the context of this one. This is what's brought it to this panel. And I'm really keen not to keep dragging this across meetings. If we've got follow-up questions about process that the monitoring officer can answer, I'm happy to put those to them, but not on the decision itself. Okay.
Can I just ask supplementary? So in that case, can we propose that we write to the full said individual and we look to strengthen our processes in the future? And I'll also, like I said, I haven't checked the monitoring officers, what she's written as to how she defended the lack of evidence, but I think we need to bottom this out.
Well, we've got a section of the paper that talks about the processes that have been put in place since this was discovered. We can add to that, we can strengthen that, we can improve on that. But I'm not sure what it is that you're looking for further.
I'm just saying the clarity about why information wasn't kept to justify a decision, and therefore from a public perspective, what's the accountability there?
Okay, look, let me take that one away and have a think about. I'll commit to coming back to the panel with a update on that. I just think, from a very personal point of view, I'm nervous about committing to something that is outside of my professional understanding. I haven't got any professional leaning on that. I can't lean into any knowledge, and it's important we get it right. So if it's okay, I'll take that. I'll note that, and I'll come back to the panel with an update on how we take that forward. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. So we've got reference to Part 8D of the Council Constitution Property Procedure Rules, and which refers to decisions made deferred to the Executive Director of Property. But at the time, it was by the Chief Exec. As part of that 8D, there is procedurals to consult the cabinet member responsible for property when doing these decisions. Is that the same wording that was that was there in the Constitution at the time? Has that would that have happened? Is it something that's new that's helping account for this kind of situation in future?
Yeah, that's probably one we'll take away and get a written response on. I don't think anyone in this room or online can answer that, but we'll make sure we can get a follow-up on that.
Looking at page 5, 3.4 of the explanation, the decision is significant because of 500,000 inside, because it didn't pass 500,000. I think the confusion is by the actual explanation given by the previous CEO, which effectively said that his decision had an impact of 119 million. So therefore, either the way he has expressed it is possibly incorrect, or the way he has judged it is incorrect. Either way, I think is that the decision is that I would like to propose that we ask that the monitoring officer considers trying to complete the record by contacting the previous CEO, if that is possible, and that's legal and that's allowed and good practice. And secondly, is that they consider looking at this process and taking the ambiguity out that allowed this situation to exist. And I don't feel, having read the new process, that that is sufficiently firm for me to feel as if I was making that decision, I'd be covered. And I think is that it's still a very waffly process, and I would like it firmed up personally. And I don't know if we would be able to do a vote on these things in this thing, or if it's something you would like to take forward. But I think those two things must be considered as a recommendation back to the two people concerned.
In danger of sounding repetitive, I think on the first point, that is more about the decision, and that's not what we're discussing. I think your second point's very valid, though, in terms of the woolliness of how those decisions arrived at, if that's okay. Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
I think what we as a group need to understand is the process that was followed. To what extent was it a normal process for this sort of decision to be made by an officer in that situation? So the chief executive at the time, was he making it in accordance with the constitution and the law as it stood at the time? Because that seems to me to be the key issue. And I don't think that we as a forum are qualified to make that decision. We can have our view and opinions on it, but we're not qualified to make that judgment. And I think that's the key thing that we need to have the monitoring officer here to guide us on, or for her to take us through that in a written statement to understand to what extent, if there was deviation from either our constitution or the law, that we have visibility of that. And once we have that, then we're in a much better position to take a view on what the next steps could or should be. So I think if we can get that guidance from someone who is properly qualified to give that, then we can review that and move forward with this. Until that time, I think we're just airing out our views and opinions. Thank you.
Yeah, I sort of largely agree with that. I think the only thought I have with that is, in effect, I suspect that's what's in the report, and it might just be that it's not clear. So we might not. Maybe it's worth getting some highlighting on.
Guidance as to whether there was any deviation from the legal process and from the council's own constitutional process as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm saying that because in my ask was, is this a key decision? Yes or no? If yes, why? If no, yeah. But that's what I asked for, and it might be that we don't feel it's clear in this report. So I think that may be something to take away. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, I'll tell you where I'm at. I think it's an important decision, this one, really. I mean, it's talking about 119 million pound decision and all the rest of it. It's all big money, and it's an important thing. It's not something that a junior officer would have signed off. strategic importance? Does it relate to multiple wards? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Financial impact, does it hit the 500,000 threshold? Community effects. The thing is I think it doesn't go with the spirit of the law. But when you're looking at the letter of the law, I don't know if it hits that threshold, and those particular points. I mean, I've looked at the Constitution, Part 8D, the Local Authorities Regulation 2000, and you know, there's also Secretary of State's guidance. I mean, we can go around the houses all day long. The thing is what's there to gain? We can keep investigating this and looking at this. What are we going to gain out of this? We've got a legal contract in place. The chief executive is not within reach. We've got a new leader of the council. We've got a new administration. I think there is something we can recommend to cabinet about the process and improving the process. And just having a little bit of transparency and a light shone on these sorts of decisions, because there was a lot of shifty stuff that was going on, or perception that there was a bit of things that would be done behind closed doors, and decisions like this, even if it's a note on the cabinet or full council, so just to be noted that this action has been taken. I think that is a process maybe we could look into improving. But yeah, that's where I stand. I mean, you know, we're locked into a decision. We're locked into a contract. I think we've got to note it. We've got to put a recommendation forward to have a look at the process, see if we can make things a little bit more transparent. But I'm not going to spend hundreds of, you know, tens of thousands of pounds on getting legal opinion, counsel's opinion. You know, you put 100 barristers in a room together, you get 50 of them going one way, 50 of them going another way. It's not going to get us any better. We just need to look at our process internally and see if we can improve those. I think we just leave it there. We've got the report and we've got the information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Look, I appreciate everyone's input. I also appreciate it's a complex issue. I'm not going to commit in this meeting to a follow-up agenda item. Doesn't mean that it won't happen, but I don't want to say that will happen now. I will have a conversation outside the meeting just to see if we can get some more clarity on some of the points. But for me, what I have heard, and I suspect would form the basis of any recommendation I would make, is a tightening of the criteria, a tightening, a sort of a demystifying of the criteria, particularly around subjective measures of that. And I looking at the report, I kind of feel like that's already, the wheels are in motion. It might just be that we can continue to tighten that up as well. So look, thank you for that. And you know, the objective here was to bring that into the public realm, those sort of decisions, and I think we've achieved that with that discussion. And thanks for your contributions. We won't go into the work programme in detail. The only thing I will say, just as a note, is that we are looking at the date of the next meeting because of how the revised council plan connects to the next cabinet meeting. So Mark will be in touch with that, just to see if we can bring it forward slightly, just to give a bit more time between our meeting and the cabinet meeting that's going to be looking at it. Thank you. I know I start all these meetings with an ambition of finishing before 10. So Councillor Sharp, if it was a KPI, I'd definitely be in the amber at the moment. It doesn't mean that the quality of these meetings are dropping at all.